Well, hello and welcome to the first video where we want to set up our data model. Because in order to work with Power BI and learn more about DAX, of course we need to set up the data model structure first. So let's do that. Let's import the data. In our case, we have an Excel file which you can download from the resource section to follow along. So that is why I can either click here on this import data from Excel, or I can go up there in the ribbon bar, tick Excel here, or go to get data and also tick Excel here, or as a fourth option, go to more, and then a navigator window appears where I could also select Excel as a data source. So I keep it simple now. I simply click here, import data from Excel, and then I use this PBI training XLSX file. I can tick this option and I click on open. So we connect. So far so good. And then the navigator window appears. Here it is. Now we can select here the specific tables or the worksheets. So the little table icons with the blue bar, these are Excel tables. And if you're like me, then you consider it best practice to import the table instead of the whole worksheet, because then you make sure you only import the specific data from the worksheet you need. So because we have tables, I can tick these options here, these three, and then I simply go to transform data. Because most of the time there is something we need to adjust, so I still don't know why Power BI is actually highlighting the load, but I would always go to transform data first, just to make sure that there is no additional data or data missing which we need to clean at first. So let's check that. Okay, here we are the suppliers table, and I can see it's called suppliers 3. That's not what I want, so I go to the naming option here in the property section and say this is my suppliers TBL. Suppliers, and I call it TBL as an abbreviation for table. I can press enter, and you can see that now it's renamed. By the way, you could also right click here and say I want to rename it here. Works exactly the same way. So let's do that for the orders table. Click on rename and call this orders TBL. So far so good. And then finally we'll do the same for the employees table. Right click here and say rename. And so this is our employees TBL. Okay, so let's check the tables. Then employees TBL, I can see we got ID, name, surname, and office country. And I also got office team with missing data in here. So let's fix that. We see that these are all office team US, and then there's office team UK. And we can see that there is simply the missing below. So we can simply fill this down. There's an option under the transform ribbon. You can go in here and say, first select a specific column and say then under fill option, you can either fill down, which is the default one, or fill up. In our case, it's fill down, so you can take the option fill down. Tick this, and now you can see that it's simply filled with the value from above cell. By the way, you could also right click here, and there's also all these options you find in the ribbon, and also as an example here, the fill option, right? So if you go to C, there's a fill option there, and also you have an option to fill up and fill down. If you prefer it this way, works exactly the same way. Okay, so we got this fixed. Then another thing I spotted, if I go to the suppliers table, skipping the orders table for now, I see that my office country here has UK and then USA. So obviously the country, United States here, is abbreviated as USA. In the employees table, on the other hand, it's currently spelled as US. Now even though those two tables, the employees table and the suppliers table, will not be linked together, because they basically have the relation with the orders TBL, which is our main facts table, and these two are dimension tables, I still like to be concise here and actually have USA everywhere. That is why we can also do a little transformation here. I simply go in here, select the column here, and then say I want to replace the values. There's an option here, replace values, and then you can search for a specific value, like for instance US, and then simply replace it with USA. Now if you do this and click OK, now you see basically that you also replaced US with USA. Okay, so we got this also fixed, and I think the employees table for now is done. So the suppliers table itself, one more time, also check the data types, whole number for supplier ID, that's fine, supplier name, ABC, also okay, and country ABC, also okay. So we're good to go with those two tables, and let's finally take a look at the orders TBL. So select it, and then let's check that. So employee ID, which is this one, which will be linked to the employees table. Here also, I would highly recommend that you check that the data type is correct. So if there's a number, a whole number for employee ID here, it makes sense that if you want to connect it to the employees table here, that you also check that this is also a whole number in here. If not, simply change it here, okay? And the same is true for supplier CBL, because there's supplier ID here, which will be linked to the orders table, which is in this case a whole number. So it should also be a whole number in the orders table. So let's actually scroll a little bit to the right and let's just see where the supplier ID is. And there it is, this column here, and we can see it, and it's also a whole number. So that is fine. So let's check the other columns. Always have a quick look at the data type. And here I can see that our orders table is a date here, which the calendar icon implies. The ship date, on the other hand, is not. So this is something I like to adjust. And that is why I can click here. And then I say I'd like to adjust this here and say this should be a date. So if you try it this way, then Power BI will ask you, do you want to replace the current step or add a new step? This window will only appear if the last step, as you can see here in the applied step windows, was also change type. Now, because it was, it will ask me whether I want to replace the last step here or add a new step. I would highly encourage you, if you do that, always try to add new step. Because if this step fails, for whatever reason, it's easier to revert it, okay? So I tick this option, and you can see we ran into an error. And that is why, as long as we have a new step here, we can simply click the cross symbol, and we have the original situation back. If we would have actually replaced the current step, and I would click the cross symbol here, then all the data types which Power BI has actually added to the specific column would be gone, and I would have to do this manually, and I don't want to do that. And I guess you don't want to do that either. So adding new step is fine, but how do we fix the ship date? Well, the trick here is, and this is what also I would recommend you to do, is first transform it always into a text, because this operation actually never fails, at least from my personal experience so far. If you do it this way, then again go to add new step, and then you see that now we have a text field, okay? And you see we still got the value. And from the text field, it's easier now to go to this ABC type and using local functionality, take this option here, and then just wait until the window appears. There it is. And then you can specify what kind of data type it should be, what it should be a date. We set that already, and then choose the local setting. And in this case, I'll leave to the default one, which in my case is Germany, because I know that this works for this specific formatted date. And if I go to OK now, I will see that here I got the real dates inside, okay? And I can also see the icon here, and also the green line, which implies that there is no missing data and also no errors. So far, so good. Then what else can we do? If we scroll to the right, and let's just check what's there. Any other issues we explore? Well, here in the customer zip code, we can see that there is currently missing data in here, right? So this is something, if you go in here, of course, you can check what this is actually. If you go to null here and filter this, then you would see that obviously here for one specific customer, in this case, which is Patricia McKenna, there basically the zip code is missing. Well, in our case, it's not that important, actually, because we don't work with this column. But in a real-world scenario, if the zip code would be an important column and you want to use it in your report, then I would highly recommend you to go to the specific person responsible for that and address it and ask what actually the zip code is to fill this missing data, okay? For now, let me actually remove the filtered row step because I don't want to do that. And just in case you want to replace it, you could do it simply by, you already know that, you go to replace values here. And as an example, I just show it to you for now. If I, one more time, select the null here, just that you see it, we got again Patricia McKenna. If you select the column first and then go to, in this case, replace values, this option, replace values, you can really search for missing data by simply really adding the null here. So null with, let's say, 99999. And now if you click OK, then you would see that you replaced basically here the zip code and you filled it completely, right? But be aware, if you do it this way, make sure that you have not filtered the rows, because otherwise, if you now load the data, you would only load the data for this specific customer, right? You don't want to do that. So let me actually remove this step and also the prior one. If you want to really fill the values, then simply do not filter the rows up front. Only replace the values directly. That would work. But for us now, as I said, it's not that important, so that is why I removed those two steps and leave that for now. Okay, so we got those three tables. And then we need one additional table, which is our dates table, right? Best practice in Power BI, if you want to use time intelligence functions, make sure you have a proper dates table set up. So let's actually check the dates. In my case, I know I have dates between 2019 and 2021. If I scroll to the bottom, I can see that. So obviously I need, for this time frame, my specific date table. So let's actually import it. I can go under Home and add a new source. Click this, and then I want to use a blank query in here because we will use custom M code to do that. And here now we have a query. We can write the query either here in this window, but what I would recommend you to do is go to the advanced editor here and then remove everything inside. So this is such a sample code, and now we simply paste the specific M code. So you can find this in the resource section. It's quite long, so you don't need to write it yourself. And the great thing here really is that you also do not need to know how to write it yourself, because you can use this in all your future Power BI projects. So let me copy this here and then go back to the editor and paste it. And you can see there are no syntax errors, but it's quite a long formula actually. And there's a lot of columns for the dates. So click on Done. Now we have the function, and the only thing left is to invoke the function now. So I can go in here, start date, and say we start at the 1st of January 2019. And then finally the end date will be the 31st, in my case, of December in 2021. Okay, like that. And the financial year start month is simply January. Just in case you have something different, you can also specify it here. For instance, some companies start their financial year in June or in July, and others in May because it ends in April, and so on. So you can modify it here. But in my case, 1 is fine. And if you have an additional table with a holiday column, you can also import it here and choose the column from. Just to, flag certain days as holidays, because they vary between country. So maybe there's something specific for your country, then you can choose this column here from a holidays table. But you need to import it first. In my case, it's not the case, so I'm fine with that. Then I invoke the function here, and I have my dates table, which is currently called invoke function. So let me actually rename this here properly and say this is my dates TBL to be consistent here. Okay. And then finally, of course, we can load this data. So click on close and apply as soon as you're done. And then we import the data and let Power BI detect the relationships. By the way, you can also set in the options and settings that Power BI should not detect relations automatically. If this is something you don't want to do, you want to do it manually, then you can also enable that. For us now, that's fine, because if I go to the model view just to check what Power BI has actually spotted here, okay, and I also click on upgrade now. This in the future will probably not necessary for you, but in my case, I still need to click it, the option to see this new interface in here. Now I have my orders table, which is my facts table, and I have my dimensions table, which is the suppliers table, and also the employees table. And you see that here, if I hover over them, the relations are here set up correctly, automatically detected by Power BI. And as I said, if you don't want this to do automatically, you can disable it in the options and settings under file if you want to do that. The last table we need to adjust here is the dates table. I also put it on top here, and then I need to create my connection between the dates table and the date field in the orders table. Now we have the orders date. We also have the shipping date, or here the ship date called. However, I want to create my visualizations based on the order date. So that's why I'm using the date here and drag it here onto the order date. Like that. And create a connection, and you can see it's a 1-2 star as the other ones as well. It simply means we have one specific value, in each of our dimension tables, and hopefully many values for the same day, as an example, from the dates table in the orders table, which means that more customers or multiple customers ordered a lot of items from our stores on the same day. So that's basically setting up the data model. Other things so far are not necessary. And now we go back to the view here, and now we can actually start creating our first calculations. So that's it for this video. Thanks a lot for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next couple of videos. Until then, best guys. Hey friends, welcome back to the next video. Now, after setting up our data model, let's actually create our first DAX calculations. Now, the first thing I like to do here at the beginning is setting up my measures table to make sure that I have grouped my measures together. So I go to under the home, enter data, and just make sure that here I use my dummy table, which I called measures TBL. Okay, and I don't need to have a column here. So just a second, and there it is. There's the measures TBL table. Now I right click on this table, because if I right click on the table, then I make sure if I create a new measure, then this measure is automatically placed in this table by default. So here we go. Let me just increase the size so you can see that better. And I will go with the total sales at the beginning, because it's the most often used measure. In the next couple of videos, we will modify it in various ways. But for now, let's first create it, the default one. So total sales is equal to, and now I say this is the sum x function, sum x, because I want to iterate over a table. So each of the x functions always has table as the first argument. We can tick this option now and refer to a table. The table we're going to use is the orders table, so orders TBL. And the expression I want to refer to is simply a multiplication of, in this case, the amount which we have. So in the orders table, the amount, and we multiply it by the selling price. There's also a selling price here. We can select those two, and we can close parentheses. And also, just to format this, let me go to a new line, press Shift Enter, and we simply put it in the second line. You can also press Tab key if you want to simply add it in here, okay, like that. And we've created our first measure, the total sales. We can press Enter, and we have the measure created. And this already means that now we can simply right click on the column one and simply delete it from model. If we do that, we get rid of our dummy column, and our measures table automatically adjusts, is put on top of all the fields we have in here, and also has the calculator icon in here, right? So far so good, and we can now continue. The first thing here which I like to discuss with you is the so-called Pareto rule, and let's check whether the Pareto rule applies. The Pareto rule would state that 20% of our customers deliver 80% of the sales. So is this true for this specific data set? Well, I don't know. Let's try and find out. So let's create a measure in here. So right click on the measure table and select a new measure. In this measure here will be simply our Pareto rule. We will check it for now. So we say the top 20%, call it this way here, of customers, right? And say is equal to, let me go to new line in here, press the tab, and then I will define a variable. It's always best practice to use a lot of variables. It makes your code or the formula you write, well, easier to read, also for your colleagues later on. So use a variable, and I use an underscore here to start with the variable here, something I often do. So you don't have to do it, you can give it the name you like, but I like to start it with an underscore. And then I say, let's say 20%, or let's call it simply customer, okay? Customers percent. And what I do here is equal to a distinct count. So simply distinct count, and I will use the customers. So here I could either refer to the customer name, but it could be the case that a customer name appears twice or the same. There are two different customers with the same name. So maybe the company name is the same. So that is why I want to refer to the customer ID. Because I use the customer ID, then I make sure that I have really all the customer IDs. And a distinct count counts the number of distinct values in the column. And if we multiply this by 0.2, we make sure that here we got 20% of customers. So here we only store the number itself. So let's say we have 100 customers. We multiply this by 0.2 and we got 20%. So now this tells us then, or we store in the customer percent variable, how many customers are actually the 20%. Okay? And then I can go to new line, press Shift Enter, and use the return keyword, return. And what I want to return here is I want to calculate. Now I need an expression. That is why we have started with the total sales, because now we can refer to this expression here and make sure here to evaluate the total sales in a different filter context, which means we do not want to have the total sales for all our customers, but only for 20% of the customers. And not any 20%, we want to have it for the 20% with the highest sales ranking. So basically those customers who made the most amount of sales for us, right? Who drove the most amount of revenue. So that is why we use the filter function here. Remember, filter allows us to add a table inside and then filter this table. The table we're going to use is, here in this case, values, the values function, because the values function allows us, you can read through it, but basically what it does, it returns a unique list of customer names, okay? Or specific, in our case, customer names, because we refer to customers, or in our case, customer IDs. So that's why you can say customer ID. So simply means remove any duplicates, give us give us a unique list of customer IDs. And now, how do we want to filter this? Well, we use the rank X function for that. We say rank X, and maybe we would like to modify this a little bit, depending on how you write your code, but let's say rank X function here, rank X, here we go, this one. And now we need to give it a table. The table here will again be the values of the customer ID, here we go, this one. And then we can close this here and say we want to rank it by the total sales. And the ranking will be descending. We can skip the value. You see, it's in brackets, so it's optional. But for us, important is the order. The order should be descending because the customer with the highest sales, or the customer ID with the highest sales, should be on top, right? So that's why I say descending. Ties, I will skip ties for now. And then finally, I say this should be, in this case, let me go to the line, less or equal to, and say customer, in this case, underscore customer percent. Okay, like that. Then I can close the parenthesis and the second one as well. So basically, what we do here is the following. We first store the amount of customers, which would be 20% of our customers. So if we have 100 customers, it would be 20, saved in this variable. Now then we actually calculate the total sales, but not for all the customers, but in a filtered context. And the filtered context will be a table. The table will contain a unique list of customer IDs, but these customer IDs will be ranked based on their total sales, descending, and the ID itself will be only the first X entries, the first 20% entries of this list. That's the idea. And let's actually press enter to evaluate it, just to make sure that we don't get any errors, so it doesn't look that way. And now let's actually visualize that. Let's say, okay, show us the total sales figure here. And then also maybe as a second value, go with the top 20%, right? These ones. And now we can see both of those bars next to each other. You see that basically the top 20% here, of course, is less. We can also add the data labels. Let me go here and say, I'd like to see the data labels to see the value itself. So obviously 800,000 euros, dollars, or whatever kind of currency we have, coming from the top 20% of the customer. And to figure out whether this is actually really 80%, it doesn't look that way, but of course we need to check it. So right click here, go to new measure, and then let's actually visualize that here using best practice, the divide function. So let's say Pareto true, question mark. So I'm not sure whether the question mark is supported, that's why I skip it here. But let's say Pareto test, okay? Pareto test is equal to, and let me go to new line here and say, here I'd like to use the divide function. So divide function is best practice because you read here the ability to handle divide by zero errors. So just in case this might happen, divide function helps you to solve this and avoid any kind of errors in your model. So say divide, here we go. And the numerator will be our top 20%. So this measure here, the denominator will be the total amount of sales, so total sales. And then we can simply say, as an alternate result, you could give it one, let's say, error occurred, or anything else, let's say not available, okay? Not available, like that. I can close this and we are good to go. Press enter, and then let's actually check this. What's the result here? Let's go with maybe a card here. Need to first deselect this one here, click somewhere in the blank screen, and then we go with the top 20% here, click it, and choose a card, and we can see we got here, oh, sorry, Pareto, that's what I wanted, replace it, and we got 0.58. Click on this option here and say you'd like to see it as a percentage figure, right? And then we see, obviously, okay, we got 58.2%, and obviously this is not the 80% which we would expect. And therefore we could now tell the report consumer here that obviously Pareto is not applied here to our specific data set. One thing I like to actually, we also take a look at, because it's easier to understand that probably for all of you, is if I go back to the formula, right? The original we had, the top 20%. Now maybe you would like to figure out how that actually works. And I personally am a visual guy, so for me it's always easier to see what I actually do here. We said that we evaluate the total sales here in a modified context, right? Which is modified this filter, the filter table, which is this one. Now let's actually do this visually by simply applying this and doing this step by step. If I go to this option here, the values orders TBL custom ID, I can copy this and let's actually create a table. If I go under, in this case, modeling, I can say I'd like to create a new table using a DAX expression. I can do that if I go in here, click this option, and call this, let's call it test equal to. I will remove this later on, but for now, let's actually do it this way. If I press enter, you'll see that now we have created a calculated table. And if we take a look at the data view here for this specific table, take this option, you will see that here, that's what we get, right? It's a unique list of all the custom IDs we have. Okay, so obviously here you see we got 89 rows in here in total. Okay, and now let's actually take a look at the modified version. If I go to my top 20%, instead of using this whole table, what we did was we filtered it based on the ranking of this one on total sales and only kept here the 20%, right? The best of them. So if I use this whole modifier here, so values of this one with the ranking, and copy all of this up there to this last parenthesis belongs to the calculate, so I can use this one, Control C to copy it. Then I go to my test here, and instead of using only the values, I use now the modified values using this filter function here. And of course, customer percent is currently here not evaluated, so I also need to create the variable. So let's go in here. Okay, let's do that. Let's go here and say var underscore customer percent equals, and there we do exactly the same. So we use a distinct count, and we say here the column name will be the ID. So from the order table, the custom ID times 0.2, right? So like that. And then of course, let's actually maybe do it this way. And of course, if you use the var keyword, we also need to return something. Return like that. Okay, and then let's actually take a look, customer percent. And obviously now it works. And maybe we also remove the spaces here and we have a formula, right? Okay, so we're good to go. And now let's evaluate that. Press enter. And let's see how our test table has modified. So if we go one more time back to the data view here, we see that now we only have 17 rows left. And these are actually the customers, okay? And that's how we can think of it visually. So originally we had 89 customers. And if we have a unique list of custom IDs in a complete data set, and if you multiply this by 20%, so 89 times 20% is around 17, right? So these are the 17 rows which remain after filtering our custom IDs based on their sales ranking. And that's how this whole structure works. And that's basically what we use if we go back to the model view here in our top 20% here, okay? So this is also a good idea to take a look at the table itself, visualize it, and this might be helpful to understand how the formula actually works. So for now, we have done this, and because we do not need this test table anymore, I simply right-click here and say I'd like to delete it from model. It was just for understanding how that works, okay? So let me take this option here and say, yes, I'd like to delete it, and we are basically removing it and save the storage space. Okay, and that's it actually for the Pareto testing. So hopefully that was helpful. As always, thanks a lot for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys. Well, hello and welcome back. Now in this video, we'd like to set up a few additional measures which might be helpful in the next couple of videos. So let's do that. Let's first right-click on the measures table and create a new measure. And let's actually calculate the total cost in our example. So far we have the total sales. Now that is why I will name this measure total cost. Total cost is equal to, and here I say simply a SUMX function because we want to iterate over another table. The table itself will again be the orders table, and then the expression will be the amount. So in this case, we have the assumption that we sell everything which we buy basically. So that's why we also use this amount column in here. And then we multiply this not by the selling price, but by the purchasing price. So there's also a purchasing price, this one here, and then we can close the parenthesis. And let's also format this correctly. Let's go Shift Enter to go to new line in here. Okay, so this will be our total cost measure. So far so good, we can evaluate that, and we got the measure here as well. And finally, if we got the total sales and the total cost, we can also calculate the difference and call it profit. So let's right click on the measures table here, go to new measure, and say this will be our total profit. Total profit is equal to, let me go to new line in here, and say this is equal to the total sales. So total sales, we can refer directly to the measure and simply subtract here the total cost. So far so good, we can press enter, and we also evaluate and have the total profit here as well. Then additionally, I'd like to also calculate the total sales last year, as well as the total cost last year, and therefore also the total profit last year. Okay, so okay, let's do that. Let's right click here on the measures table and say new measure and use some kind of time intelligence here, right? So let's do that. For the measure itself, let's say this will be the total sales. To spell it correctly, of course, total sales, LY for last year is equal to, and now I simply say I want to calculate here, calculate. The expression will be the total sales, but in a modified context. And this modified context is decided by filters. And here I have various options. In my case, I keep it simple. I will simply use the same period last year function. And all it needs is dates column. And this dates column, of course, there we want to refer to our dates table, and there the continuous date range column, this one here. Okay? Then we can close this and also close the calculate function. And finally, of course, let's go in here and also format this like that. Okay, so please evaluate the total sales, but in the modified context with the same period last year function. Press enter, and we have also the total sales last year. And the same is true for the total cost. This could be pretty easy to do. We simply copy everything we have here. So we do not need to rewrite it. We copy it, we right click on the measures table here, select new measure, and say you also can do that here by simply do it for the cost here as well. Total cost last year, right? So setting up like that. And the only thing we need to modify here is simply that we refer to the cost. So total cost, here we go. The other things are the same. Press enter, and we have this measure here as well. And let's do that for the profit as well. So right click on the measures table, new measure, and I can paste this here inside as well and call this total profit last year, right? So profit, in this case, total profit last year. And the only thing we need to modify here is the profit. So we need to replace the total sales measure with the total profit. And we are good to go. Press enter. And now we have also evaluated the total profit. And the final thing which I like to do is actually calculate the difference between the total profit and the total profit last year. And here, quite easy, right click here, new measure, and go in here, let's say profit growth, and now it's up to you whether you want to calculate it as a percentage number. In my case, I simply do it as a difference here and say this will be total profit minus total profit last year. Total profit last year. There it is. Okay? And that's basically it. And you can press enter, and you also have created this measure in here. All right, welcome back. Now, in this exercise, we dive a little bit into time intelligence, and our goal is to predict the sales for the current month. And our prediction will be based on the last 3 months of sales we have. Okay. And by the way, I'm using total sales as an example, but you could use another measure like total profit as well, or total cost. That's up to you. So let's do that. Let me first create a date table. So go to date here, and then I remove the day as well as the quarter from the hierarchy. And then I also like to increase the text size a little bit so you can see that better on your screens. So let me go to the formatting option and say under values here, I'd like to tick here the text size and say this should be 15. Okay. So, and we are good to go. We see the year as well as the month level here. So far, so good. Now let's actually display the total sales. So let's tick total sales. And then we see we start actually in July. And before July, we do not have any data. So the idea is now creating a measure which, for October as an example, predicts the October sales based on the prior 3 months. So it's simply July plus August plus September and divide it by 3. That's the idea. And I know, of course, that there are various ways to do a forecast prediction. Maybe you rely on a prior year. For example, if you have a lot of sales in December, then it would make sense, of course, to use the December from the prior year and so on. But in this example, we simply use the prior 3 months to do that. And this requires a little bit of time intelligence. So one specific function, even though there are probably various ways to solve this, but I have one specific time intelligence function for that in mind. So if you want to pause the video now, you can do that and try out yourself. Otherwise, please go along with me. So let me right click on the measures table to create this measure and tick on new measure. And here's our measure. And then let's say here, call this sales forecast. Forecast is equal to. Then I go to new line, press Shift Enter, and define my variables. So I say my first variable here is underscore month 3. And this is equal to, and go to a new line here and say calculate. The expression will be the total sales. Here we go. And then we need to modify the filter context and say that the date add function here moves the given set of dates by a specific interval. And now we need to give it the continuous date range, which in our case is the dates TBL or date TBL, and the date column here. And then the number of intervals will be -3. And the interval itself will be month in our case. But as you've seen, you can also specify other intervals if you want. So let's close this and also close the calculate function. Then we can go to new line, press Shift Enter. Let's actually define the next variable. So var underscore month 2 is equal to, and it's kind of similar to what we have done with the month 3. Again, we return to the calculate function, define the total sales, here we go, and use the date add function, date add, and define the continuous date range. So the date TBL, the dates column. This time the interval will be -2, and again we are on a monthly level in our case. Let's also close this and do it one last time. So for the var underscore month 1 is equal to, go to a line and define calculate and refer to the total sales, and using date add function, date add. So we get used to it, date, table, TBL, the date column, return, or go back 1 month, specify it, and close it. And we are good to go. So basically now we have defined 3 variables. We stored the total sales from the month, or 3 months ago, total sales 2 months ago, and total sales 1 month ago. And we use calculate because we need to modify the filter context. Because remember, in the visual, in our case it's simply a table, but exactly be the same for any other kind of visual you use. If you have any kind of time dimension in this visual, for instance for January, this is the current filter context, January 2020, and using calculate and date add function, it allows us to jump back and modify this filter context. That's what we do. And finally, whenever you use variables, you need to be aware that you then need to use the return keyword, so return, and then what you want to return here is divide. So divide function is always best practice to use because it avoids division by 0 errors, and the numerator will be the sum of the 3 variables we have. So you can specify like month 3 as an example, plus underscore month 2, and plus underscore month 1. Here we go. And then we say we would like to divide those 3, or the sum of those 3, by 3. And as an alternate result, we can specify that we don't want to show anything, so I type in a blank, just in case we get any division by 0 errors. Let's close this here, and then we should be good to go. Now if I press enter now to evaluate this, we should not get any errors, so far so good, and we have created our sales forecast. And now to visualize that, if you take the table or whatever kind of visual you have, could be a bar chart or whatever, then you now can display also your sales forecast. Let's take that option here, and then you see here, this would be here a valid sales forecast for October based on the prior 3 months. Now you see that here and here, those two would not make too much sense. You can filter this out if you want, because you need to be aware that, for instance, for September, it would only take those two into account and simply divide then the sum of those by 3. Or for August, as an example, it simply would only take into account July, because there is no June data and also no May data. That is why this divided by 3 would simply return this value in here. That probably does not make too much sense. That's why I said you can also filter this out. But for the other months, this would be the sales forecast. And as you can see here, the sales forecast is not really good based on the prior 3 months, but this was just an example how you would apply this in real world scenario. Okay? So hopefully you understood what we did in the formula itself. As always, thanks a lot for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys. Hello and welcome back to the next video. Now let's actually figuring out how many transactions has a specific customer done with us in the last 30 days. So it's more a customer deep dive into customer analysis, right? So let's figure that out. The first thing I need to visualize that somehow. So I will go to the orders table here and take the customer company as an example here, and I get a table with a unique list of the customer company names. Then I will go to the formatting option and say I'd like to visualize the values in a bigger size, let's say 15, so you can see this better on your screens. So far so good. Now, if we say that each row in our data set would be one transaction, it would be quite easy to figuring out how many transactions in total the customers have done with us, right? Because all we need to do is simply count the number of rows for each customer. So that would not be a real issue. On the other hand, if we like to figuring out how many transactions has, for instance, Alfred's Footerkister here done with us in the last 30 days, this would mean that we need to modify the context a little bit. Because we only want to count the rows in the table, so the IDs, the transaction IDs for the company, if it is within the last 30-day time range. And in our case, the last 30 days could be any date, depending how you specify the last day you want to use. But let's say in our case, we use the maximum order date in the specific here in this data set. And the max order date, this will simply be something in May 2021, because this is the current end of the data set. So we can visualize this. So if I right click here on the measures table and go to my maximum order date, let's call this max order date is equal to, and then I can use the max function. So max, there's also a last date function, but here you could also use the max function. So max, and then in the orders TBL, here we go, the order date, this one here, okay? Then let me close this and let's evaluate that. And this should return us the maximum order date in our specific data set. So let me tick this and somewhere and click it, and then visualize this as a card here. And you would see we here get the 6th of May in 2021. But of course, if you would apply this later on to your own data set, then the last date would of course be then the maximum day you have in the data set, right? So this is the day you can use, and this is the day we will use here. The only thing I like to do, if I tick here this option, let's say I only like to visualize actually the day itself. I don't need the hour itself, right? Like that. That's fine. So that's our reference date. Now I actually like to count the transactions within or from this date minus 30 days. So all the transactions in this time frame. To do this, I right click on the measures table here and say I'd like to create a measure. Here we go, there's the measure. Let me increase the size here. And then I say transactions last 30 days. Okay, so it's up to you how you want to name this, but that's fine for me. And then I go to new line, press Shift Enter, and here define the calculate function. So calculate. Now we need to give it an expression. In our case, as I said before, each transaction is here in one row of the table. So we want to count the rows. So count rows of the table itself will be the orders TBL. That is fine. But now we need to modify the context. And that is why I used calculate at the beginning. Because if we simply count the rows in the orders table for each customer, this would give us then all the rows or the transactions for each customer, but not with the limit of the last 30 days. And to actually add this limit, we use the calculate function to modify this now, this count rows, and say we want to filter here, we want to give it, or we want to actually count the rows on a filtered version of the table. And the filtered table, or this filter, means that within the dates table, dates table, which is connected to the orders table and therefore is allowed to filter it. Within the dates table itself, we would like to ensure that the date from the dates table, the continuous date range, this one, is less or equal to the maximum of the orders TBL, or orders TBL, need to spell it correctly, and in the orders TBL, the order date, this one, and at the same time, as a second condition, that is why I'm using the double ampersand here, at the same time, the dates table, need to spell it correctly, and here, the date itself should be greater than the maximum here, maximum of, again, the orders TBL, the order date, so order TBL, and their order date, let me just go down this one here, okay, so close this here, minus 30, okay, like that, and then we can close the filter, and then I can close the calculate function. So that is our formula, and let me actually maybe go here, let's actually go here, just to format this a little bit, go to calculate here, and then let's actually go here, count rows, that's fine, go here, hit enter, new line here, and at the same time use double ampersand maybe, okay, so it should actually be fine, and maybe using this one like that, right? That could be, yeah, I think that's fine. So, what do we do here? Well, we count the rows in the orders table, as we've done before. This would return all the orders for each customer if we would apply only the count rows orders table in the current context in our table. However, we want to modify that. We want to use the date table, but not the continuous, the complete dates table, only a filtered version of the date table. And this filtered version should evaluate all the dates which are less or equal to the maximum of the order date, which we have evaluated here is the last day in our data set, so the 6th of May 2021. And at the same time, it should be greater than the 6th of May 2021 minus 30 days. So this gives us a filtered version, only a 30-day version of the date table, and this date table is filtering the count rows orders table, because there's a connection between those two tables, right? We created the relationship. And this allows us now to evaluate all the transaction IDs within this time frame. And if I press enter to evaluate it, let's just see what we get. So there's our measure. And now let's actually make this smaller here again and go to our table. In the table itself, if we use the transactions now, take this option, now we see how many transactions we had, right? So for Alfred Futterkiste, for instance, we had 4 transactions. For bottom dollar markets, we had 7 transactions, and so on, right? So these are the transactions in this time frame. So far so good. Now we have this done. And in the next video, we also like to classify those customers now. Because let's say if the transaction amount is greater than, I don't know, let's say if it's greater than 10 as an example here, then these customers would be classified as top customers, for instance. And if it's below a certain threshold, let's say below 3 as an example, then they would be really bad customers, right? Or risky customers, or whatever you want to call them. And this label will create it in the next lecture, okay? So that's it for this video. So hopefully you enjoyed it, hopefully you understood what we did. If you have questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, see you in the next video. Until then, thanks guys. Hey friends, welcome back. Let's continue where we have left in the last video. Now we counted the transactions in the last 30 days for all the customers, but so far we only get a number here. And what I would like to do is I like to classify this. I'd like to say maybe all the transactions which are less than 3 should be classified as risky customers because they have not done too many transactions. Everything between 3 and 5 should be an average customer, and everything below above 5 should be a top customer. Something like that. It's up to you how you set those thresholds, but this is just an example. So let's do that. Let's first create an additional helper table. I go to under home, enter data, because this allows us to manually create a table. If you have a table, you can also import it, but for me, I simply create it myself. I say, this is my, let's call this customer classification, and then TBL. This is the name of the table, and then I define here classification, and this should be here top. Then I call it average, and the final one will be risky. Okay, risky. So these are my 3 labels for the customers. So if you want to label them differently, then of course you can modify this here if you want. Then I need to have my thresholds. So my minimum, and the second one will be the maximum. And then for the risky, I said the threshold should be between 0 and, let's say, 3. The average should be between 3 and 5. And then the top should be from 5 here up to, and there, I don't know the exact number, but if I simply use a really high number, let's say 1000 as an example, because we see that there are no customers in this time frame which have transactions more than 1000, right? So that's why I can use a really high number here to make sure that I really catch all of them. And then I can load this table, click on load. And we just need to wait until this is done. And as soon as it's imported, then we can use this table. So now it's available for us. And if I make my orders table smaller, then we see, oh, here is it, customer classification table. And if I want to see how it looks like, go to the data view and then tick the option itself, and you see exactly what it shows us. So only the thing which we have entered. And also go to the model view, and you will see that there's currently no relationship. So let me actually make this smaller here, and there is the table hidden a little bit. But you see that the customer classification table here is a table without any relation to the model itself. And that's fine, we don't need it. So let's go back to the report view, and let's now create this specific DAX classification, which allows us to show, instead of the number here, actually the real label for the customer. So let's right click on the measures table to create this measure. Click here, and there is the measure. Let's go inside, make this a little bigger, and define here the, let's call this classify customers. Need to spell it correctly. Customers, here we go, is equal to, and I go to new line, shift enter, and then I specify here the calculate, and the expression will be the selected value. So remember, the selected value returns a value, and only if one value is selected. Otherwise, you could give it, as you can see here in this brackets here, an alternate result if there's more than one selected. But that's not necessary for us, because each customer can only have one label. That is why we can use the selected value here from the customer classification table. So the classification itself, which is this one here. So the name itself, right? So this one, and let me actually, this is a really long name. So maybe you can shorten this, the table name, but for me now that's fine. And then I'd like to make sure that the transactions which we calculated, so the transactions last 30 days, so sure that we use here a filter function, so filter, because we want to modify the context, because otherwise, currently the customer classification TBL wouldn't return anything, right? Because the customer itself is coming from the orders table and has no relation to our customer classification table. That would mean it would not return here, for instance, the average customer, so it would return actually all 3 labels, and therefore nothing, because selected value can only return one specific value at a time. That is why we need to use this filter function to modify the context where this customer classification, the name itself, is evaluated. And we say here with the filter function that we want to use the complete, so remove any filters which might have been applied on this customer classification table, this one here. And then we ensure that the transactions, so transactions from the last 30 days, this one, is greater or equal to the minimum of the, here is it, the customer classification table. And at the same time, that's why we use double ampersand symbol here, we want to make sure that the transactions from the last 30 days is, in this case, less than the maximum from this customer classification table. So that is the logic. And because of the long names, it's not that easy to format, I guess, but let's go here to new line, and then also with the filter function, let's do that here as well. And I think that should be fine, probably. You can format it even more if you like, but I think that's fine for me for now. Okay? So something maybe kind of similar to that. So maybe you would add this one inside and also this one inside, right? Like that. Okay, so that should work. I pressed Shift Enter here to move them inside. Okay, so that's our formula. And as I said, you can format this even more if you like, but let's actually evaluate it first to make sure that we get a result here. And I think I missed a parenthesis somewhere. So let's just see. Oh, no, that should be fine. Selected value, there is it. Filter all. And I think that's fine. I close the filter function, and there's the second one. Okay, sorry for that. So parenthesis is fine, and we also don't get any errors, so that's fine. So what we do here is we calculate the name of the customer, so the label itself, the selected value, so we only want to have one label. And to ensure we only get one label, we need to filter this customer classification table and remove all external filters, just in case there are ones. That's why I use the all function here. And make sure that the transactions, so the number we calculated here in the visual, that this is greater or equal to the minimum, and at the same time is less than the maximum of the table. So to make sure, we check where is this number here. So for the first one as an example, and so on. Where is this number within this table here and the thresholds? And if it's between, we include the minimum for each of those rows. That's why we say we exclude 3 here, we include it here, right? And the same is true for the 5 here. And this allows us now to check where is this number, in which range, and if we have a match, then please return the classification, top, average, or risky. That's how that works, this formula. And now if we go back to the report view here and select the visual we have, and then go to our classify customers, tick this option, we will see that here we get now the label for the customer instead of only the number, right? And we see that everything which is below 3 would be 2, here risky as an example. Everything including 3, because the minimum is included, that's why I would average for 3 as an example. And if you find something with 5, let me just scroll down, maybe I find something. Here it is. 5 would already be top, because 5 is the minimum for the top customers, right? And everything above 5, like this one here as an example, is also top. So labeling works exactly as expected here, right? So far so good. And we got this. And yeah, that's it actually for this video then. So that's how you can classify your customers if you want to do that. So one thing you might to add, if you don't like the top at the bottom, sometimes I like to avoid having this. And if it disturbs you, what you could always do is, if you go to a measure, you could make sure, using an if condition as an example, to only evaluate this if there is something, in this case a customer name, in the filter context, right? So you could say here, just to show it to you, if you use something like, as an example here, if, and then is, either you use has one filter or has one value, that could be the case, or you say is in scope, that would also work. So if is in scope, and then you refer to the specific column you have. In our case, it's the customer name, so you can specify customer, in this case, customer company, then you can close this, and only if that's true, then you want to evaluate the formula we have here. And if this is not true, otherwise here you could return as false, would simply return a blank. Blank means that you don't want to show anything. And if you wrap the whole formula you have created here into this if condition within scope, then you make sure that, for instance, here for total, you will not show the top. So let's actually show this. If I press enter here, and the formula gets evaluated, and you'll see that then the top here disappears, right? So if this is disturbing to you, you don't want to see this in the total line, you could simply wrap it around this if is in scope, or has one value, would also work. Okay, so that's it actually for this video. Hopefully that was helpful, and just to encourage you, try it out yourself. And thanks a lot for your attention, and hopefully see you in the next video. Until then, best guys. Hello and welcome back. Now let's figure out a solution to a dynamic comparison of measures. So sometimes you don't want to have a static comparison, like for instance, I would like to see 2 bars for total sales and total cost, but maybe you would like to see one measure, like as an example, the total sales, and the second one should be dynamic. Or you want to do multiple dynamics, up to you, works exactly the same way. But as an example here, what we do is we use one measure as our base measure, and then we'd like to compare this to other measures. In this other measure itself, this will be dynamic. So let's set that up. Let me first create a new page here, click on the plus symbol, and then let's actually create the things we need. The first thing we need is we need to have a separate table which actually offers a list of all the different kinds of measures we want to include in this measure comparison. So I go to the home and do again the trick with the enter data. So create a manual table here. And I name this here so this is comparison. And then here I define different kinds of names. Like let's say our base measure as an example is the total sales, and our comparison measures in my specific data set here as an example could be total cost, could be total profit, and could also be total sales last year as an example. So let's say I go here with the total profit, and then I define here the total cost, and then I define here the, let's say, total sales last year, right? Okay, here we go. And just be aware, maybe it makes more sense. It's up to you whether how you want to display it. But here you have a space in between, as you can see here. I don't have this in the names here itself, like here total cost. This as an example is without spaces. So you don't have to do it exactly the same way, but you need to be aware of how you name it here, because this is the value you need to actually, grab using selected value function. So this is the comparison. And then what I also like to do, and I encourage you to do the same, is always, if you create those tables, it makes sense to add also a sorting column. So let's say call this sorting, and then here you specify the sorting option. So if you want to sort it in a specific, order, then you can add this here. So as an example, 1, 2, 3, this will make sure that if I want to sort this comparison and also want to display the comparison in this order, like total profit, then total cost, and then total sales, I could actually sort the names here by my sorting column. That is why I would always include actually a sorting column for that. So that's fine. And then I can name this table. Let's call this measure comparison. Okay, like that. And then I click on load to create the table itself. And we just need to wait until this table gets created, and then it also is added to the model itself. So, and we are good to go. So then let's actually have a look. Measures table here. And now I'm good to go. Okay, so my measures comparison is there. Okay, so far so good. If I go to the data view and select it, so my measure comparison table, I can see exactly what I have here. Total profit, total cost, and total sales last year within the column comparison. Okay, so then I can actually get this value using the selected value function. So I could say, right click on a measures table here and create a new measure. And just to show this to you, this will be, let's say, selected, this case, measure is equal to, and I say I want to use the selected value function again. So it's a great function and often used, which allows us to get the specific selection from a table, or in this case from a column, right? Returns the value when there's only one value in a specific column, otherwise returns altered results. So far so good. Now we can refer to our, in this case, our measure comparison table, and there the comparison name itself, like that. I can close this and can actually press enter just to validate this measure. So the selected measure is there. And now if I take this option and just visualize it, just as an example, I get a blank. The reason for this is because I did not specify any alternative result, and currently we get multiple values as a result. So if I specify here like something like select only one and close this and press enter, then we can exactly see this text in here, right? Select only one. But if I select something, so if I go back to my measure comparison table here, take this option and select my comparison and display this as, let's say, a slicer, go to the slicer option here and maybe adjust it, go to the general section of the slicer and make sure that the orientation is horizontally, okay? I prefer it this way, but it's up to you how you want to display it. But here I got my slicer, and let's actually get rid of the slicer header. And let's say for the items, we could also increase the size a little bit at least, right? Like that. Okay, that's fine. Now if I select something, total cost, I would see total cost. If I select total profit, I would say total profit. If I deselect everything, I can please at least select one, right? So far so good. So that works. And if you get this, then you can use exactly the measure we have here, the selected value, and evaluate this in another measure. So let me actually first do the following. Let's go to the selected measure, because you do not need to create an extra measure for that. You can also specify this within the measure itself, which we will create in just a minute. So what I do is I simply copy all of this, Control C to copy it for now, and then let's actually go in here back one more time and modify this instead of writing a complete new measure. Let's go in here and say for this measure, selected measure, we go into a new line, and here we define a variable. So let's say var, and let's say selected. Let me actually capitalize that. Selected, and say is equal to, and we specify here the selected value and so on. So this formula in here, okay, and store this in a variable. Okay, and now what we like to do is the following. We use a simple switch. You can also use an if condition if you want, but switch is nicer considering the formatting style here. So we define a variable. Now we need to return something. So we need to use the return keyword first. And what you want to return, well, we use the switch function, switch, and we evaluate the true expression. So switch true, like that. And then we define here basically compare what we captured here. So if someone is selected here, so a specific measure like total cost, total profit, or total sales last year, we save this within the variable here, and then we check what we have saved. So let's do that, or maybe let's actually first go in here and go here, tag this a little bit so it looks better, okay? And now switch to, let me go to new line here, and now we check whether our selected is equal to, and then in quotes, the text. And that's why I said at the beginning, you need to be careful if you do spaces in here, because this of course needs to be exactly the same as you wrote them here. So say, if this is total cost, then what we want to do, we would like to display total cost, exactly like that. And then we go to new line and check if the selected is equal to here total profit. Then we'd like to see the total profit. Here we go. And finally, if the selected is equal to, in this case, total sales last year, then we would like to display the total sales last year, this one here. And if you have additional measures, it would work exactly the same way. Okay? So we actually first get what we've selected, in case we have selected something. We store it in a variable, and then we evaluate the selection itself. And compare, is it total cost? Then return total cost. Is it total profit? Return total profit. Is it total sales? Return total sales. And let's say as a default value, if nothing is selected or more than one value is selected, then we would like to display the total sales. Okay, like that. And then we can close this, and we are basically good to go. And we're done. So let's evaluate this selected measure. This new one. Okay, here we go. Let me make it smaller, and you see that now we don't get the text, we get the value itself. And this will be the total sales value, but if I click on total cost, I would see total cost. If I take total profit, I would see total profit. And total sales last year would be returned simply total sales last year, so without the sales from 2021 in this case. Okay, so we have this, and now of course you can create any kind of visualization you want, just to compare the measures. So let's just say I will use my here the total sales as a bar chart here, and I would like to see my comparison measure. So let me actually also take the selected measure. So we have two of them next to each other, and maybe let's also visualize this over time. So go on the dates table and also take the date option here, or drag it into the axis. Okay, we have a hierarchy, and now you can drill in if you want, and so on, right? Let me make this bigger. Okay, here we go. And also add maybe the labels. So go to the data labels and turn them on. So far so good. And maybe it's up to you. I want to display it. Let's say position inside end. Okay. So here we go, and we can see them. And now if you select something, let's say I have my total sales, and I'd like to compare them to the total cost. I click on total cost, and then I can see here my total sales comparison to my total cost. If I click on total profit, I would see my sales comparison to total profit. If I click on total sales last year, I would see them in the prior year, even though if I have a date dimension, you see that here I don't have data in the prior month, this one here. So there's something missing here, okay? But that's fine. So first good. And then if I click on total cost again, I would see that. Maybe for the total sales last year, it would make more sense if you go drill down one level further, because then you would have more data in here, right? For these ones in here. Even though you can still, this is missing for you. But that's simply because of the measure itself. But I think the general way how that works is clear now. So this allows you to dynamically select any kind of measure you have and compare this to one base measure as an example. Or you do it even more flexible, because you could actually also create the same logic for your base measure. And then you have two measures which are dynamic, and the report consumer has then the option to compare two of those measures. And there's no specific base measure defined up front. Also a solution you can implement if you want. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you understood what we did. And hopefully you can use this in your own Power BI projects and reports. So thanks a lot for watching, and hopefully see you in the next video. Until then, best guys. Hey friends, welcome back. Now here I'd like to address a question which is often raised. The question is, how can we remove any filters which have been applied on our report? So in order to show you a solution for that, I first need to create a little report. So stick with me, I will be quick. So nothing fancy here, but let's actually create a few visuals. Let's say I personally am a friend of the donut chart, that's why I often use it. And let's say for my donut chart, I'd like to display here something from the, where is it, the orders table, here we go. And I'd like to see the, in this case, the category. So my cat here, category is here. And then I also like to display here the, any kind of measure, let's say here the total profit per category, okay? Here we go. And I got this here. And I think now it's finally time to switch the theme. So if I go to the view option here, I have various options. I personally prefer actually this dark one. So let me tick it for now. Let's click this option. Now I have this visual here as well. Of course, this also changes all the other things we have here, but that's totally fine for me. If you don't like this theme, of course, use a different one or go with your own theme. You can go to either browse themes from the gallery, which are available for you. A theme gallery is here. Or you can also customize the current theme or import your own theme if you want. So let me stick to this theme here for now. Let's actually, okay, we got this one. And let me actually right click in here because I don't like the cat here. So go in here, right click here and say I'd like to rename this. So there it is, and say call this category actually, category. Okay. So, and we are good to go. So that's the category. And now let's actually say I also like to display maybe something else. Let's go with the any kind of bar chart. Let's at least have a second visual. Let's go with the bar chart, this one here. And then I'd like to see the customer countries here. And let's say I'd like to see the total sales numbers for those. Okay, go in here and go to the total sales. And now we get a bar chart here for the customer countries, okay? Like that. Okay, and that's fine. As I said, not a fancy report here, but the idea is how can we create this, remove all filters. In order to do this, I need to create a few filters. So let's say I'd like to create a few slicers for that. So if I go under the slicer section here, and then I use, as an example, I'm going with the year from the dates table as a slicer. And let me actually go maybe with a list and also choose here. Okay, that works. Here under the formatting option, I will go with the general sections, and I personally prefer often the horizontal layout like that. Okay, so I got them here as well as a filter, and maybe just increase the text size, just that you can see that on your screens. So I'll go in here, and for the items, let me actually also increase this here, go to a little bigger size here, and I probably have to then make this bigger as well, like that. Okay, so I got this, and I can filter it now, right? 2019, 2020, and so on. So that works. And also maybe one additional slicer. So let's go with the region here and click this option and also create a slicer for that. Now I have the region itself here as well. And I will do the same trick. Go here under selection controls. Oh, sorry, under general, that's what I meant. And go to the orientation and horizontal. Okay, and also finally remove the slicer header. And for the items, increase the size just a little bit. Okay, like that. So that's fine. Let me also drag this on top. And we got at least now two slicers, right? So we got here 2019. And also I'd like to see here America. And I can see the data in 2019 for America, right? So only you here American countries. So that works exactly the way I wanted it to work. Okay. So now the question arises, okay, someone filters this report and so on, and now he or she wants to go back to the original view with only one click. Now, without reloading the browser or anything like that. How can we do this? Well, the rescue, or for us, or the idea and trick I have here for you, are bookmarks. Because for bookmarks, you can set up a specific, view and save this view, right? And then you can always return to the view by clicking on a specific bookmark. So in our case, we leave it without any filters applied like that. And what we do then is go under the view option here and then tick the bookmarks view. So if we tick this, then we got the pane here for the bookmarks, and we can add one bookmark, click on it, and say, or let's right click here and rename it as remove all filters. Remove all filters. Okay, and then we of course need to take a snapshot, so without any filters, so this current view, and you click on the three dots here and say you like to update it. As soon as you do this update here, you make sure that this current view is saved in this bookmark. And now everything, or the only thing which is left, is actually add this bookmark to any kind of button. So you go under insert as an example, and then you could choose here anything. I will go with the buttons. You can also use shapes or anything like that, but with the buttons here, and then you can specify any button. So if I tick on the bookmark button, I can use this. If I don't like this, I can also use other buttons here, like the back button, or here's also a reset button. You can also use this. So which kind of button you use here really doesn't matter. So because you can add any action to any button. But if I use the reset button, place it somewhere, in my case, I simply place it for now here, just to show you how it works. That's the main point of this video here. Okay, so I add it here, and you can now modify this further under the formatting button options and so on. But the main point here, or the most important crucial aspect, is if you go to the actions here and you click on, and then specify a bookmark. So type itself is bookmark, and the bookmark itself is the only one we currently have, which is remove all filters. So you go in here and check this here, and then you have basically added this specific bookmark, so the view you currently have, to this button. And that's all you need to do, because now you can close the bookmark pane here, and if you now do any kind of filtering, so let's click on America one more time, we can see America data, and if I select any kind of year, let's go with 2021, click this option, now I have those two filters applied, 2021 data for American countries. And now if I want to remove those two filters, I simply hover over this, and in Power BI, in the desktop version, I need to hold Control key and click. Of course, if you publish your report later on to the service, so in the cloud or on the server you have, maybe you have an on-prem server, then the report consumer only needs to click the left mouse button, right? But for us now, I need to hold Control key and click, and you will see that we got the original view back. So, and this bookmark here, the bookmark option allows us basically to remove all the filters which have been applied on the visual or on your report, right? And in our case, there are only two, but just imagine sometimes you can see reports with multiple filters, like 10 different filters. I don't say this is the right thing to do, but I have seen people doing this, and if that's the case and you want to revert then all the filters, then this would be a really quick option to do it. It's kind of easy to set up, but of course you need to know how to do it. And now you know how to do it. So that's it for this video. Hopefully that was helpful. As always, thanks a lot for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys. Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the next customer analysis using DAX. So what we would like to figure out is whether our company is growing healthy. So that means we would like to analyze the sales growth as well as the profit growth. Because sales growth is good, but what if the sales is growing, but the profit is actually going down the whole time? This would be then something rather disturbing over the long term, at least. So what I like to do is I like to first create a new report page and then use two additional measures based on the ones we already have created. So at the beginning, we have set up, for instance, total profit and total profit last year, these two measures here, and we also calculate the total sales and total sales last year. So let's actually use those measures and calculate here simply the percentage growth of each of those. So for total profit, we actually already have a comparison, like reset profit growth, which is here simply the difference between those two measures. But in my case, I'd like to go with the percentage numbers. So that is why I create a separate measure for that. I'll right click on the measures table and let's create a new measure. Go here and call this, let's say, total profit growth percent is equal to, and we use the divide function just to be sure that we don't get any issues by dividing by 0. The numerator will be the total profit minus the total profit from the prior year, this one, and the denominator will be the total profit from the prior year, like that. Okay, and as an alternate result, let's insert a 0 here. Let's close this and also format this properly. Let's go in here, Shift Enter, and a tab, and go to line and display it like that. And that's our total profit growth percent. So we divide total profit minus total profit last year, so the difference, and actually visualize it here, this percentage, in a specific visualization, just in a moment. So press Enter to evaluate that. So far, so good. And now we do the same for the total sales. So we could either write it our own, or we can also copy it, but there's so much things we need to modify. Actually, we could try it one more time. So I right click here and go to new measure, and let's call this total sales growth, right? So total sales growth percentage is equal to, and I go to new line, Shift Enter, and I will divide here. My numerator will be this time the total sales. We subtract the total sales from the prior year, Here it is, the last year, and the denominator will be the total sales last year one more time. And as an alternate result, 0. Close this, and we are good to go. Then we can press Enter and evaluate the formula, and we also got this here as well. Now, because these are percentage measures, let's actually increase the size here a little bit. So this one here, tick this option, and say I'd like to display this automatically as a percentage number. Okay, and the same is true here for the total profit growth percentage. Also go in here, percentage number, just in case you want to see that. Okay, so we got those, and now let's actually visualize that using a scatter plot, because we got two numerical figures. Click this option here, and then let's actually make this bigger, like that. Place it somewhere, and then let's actually visualize that. Let's go with the total sales growth here and tick this on the x-axis. And then we also like the total profit growth and drag this onto the y-axis, total profit growth. And then we got only 1 point. So we need to, of course, now separate this by any kind of, dimension we could add. As an example, we could use the customer companies or also the customer countries. So if you're interested in what is the sales growth by country, you could, for instance, go to the customer country option here and drag this into the detail or into the legend if you like to see it in different kinds of colors, as you can see here. But this is not what I want. I personally prefer to have this dimension here, customer country, in the detail. And so I only have blue colors in here and also don't need the legend actually for that. I also get it, of course, if I hover over those, right? The dots here, I got the information here as well. And I can further format this if I want. So you can see here, I can add the categories, and then I would also see those countries in here. And still my error here in the data set, which is 0 for this country, which does not exist. That is why I go to the filter pane here and actually go to the country here and say I want to get rid of this 0 here. So untick this option here. Okay, so that's good to go. And I can see all my country names here and where they reside here in my scatter plot. And I can see Norway pretty good considering the sales growth, and also above 100% profit growth. So this probably looks really interesting, and Poland here as well as an example, right? But of course, this would mean that we would like to filter this maybe based on a year. So if you go to the dates table here, and as a date, I'd like to go with the year. First, untick everything, take the year option here, use this as a slicer here, and then we can modify this maybe as a list. And also, instead of having like drop down, you can go to the general section here and take this as a horizontal. Okay, like that. Make this a bit smaller here. If I take 2020, then of course you can see that the data changes now, of course. And then Denmark looks pretty awesome, at least to me. Okay, so that would allow us to visualize this and see how weather In this case, the countries are growing healthy in the, well, for our company in the data set we have. And one additional thing you could do if you want is that if you go to the third tab here, so this one here, the analytics tab, you can take this option here, and if you select the visual, you can also add a trend line here if you want. So you can also add additional lines, like as you say, the sales growth, there's a target from 200%. You can add a line in here if you want. But for me now, what I like to see is actually the trend line. So I go with the trend here and click on this add option, which allows me then to add an additional trend line in here, where I can see easily, okay, based on the trend and all the data we have, the companies, where do they lie concerning the sales and profit growth. And here, for instance, I could say that Finland, as an example, here is far above the normal profit growth which you would expect, which is on the line itself, right? And this allows me then to, well, to specify the customers' countries here, actually, or decide which customer countries are growing healthy, depending on the profit growth or the sales growth, right? And yeah, that's it for this visual. So kind of easy to set up, I know, but still a really powerful insight. And as I said, try this out yourself. Hopefully you can use it, what you've learned. And thanks a lot for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys. Hey friends, welcome back to another Power BI challenge. And this time we're going to dive into a model setup challenge, and I'm going to show you a solution how you can solve this. Maybe you explore this in the future, and then this video might be very helpful. So let's do that. At first, as you can see here, I have opened up a complete new Power BI file, because we deal with a different data set. And you can download this data set from the source section to follow along. Let me first click Import Data from Excel, and then select this Filter Relations DAX, this one here. I can take this option and I click on Open. And let's see what this data looks like. So just a second until the Navigator window opens, and here we go. So within the Navigator, in this file, we get here different kinds of tables, as well as here the sheets. Now, if you're like me, then whenever you deal with Excel files and you got tables inside, then I will always go with the tables, just to make sure I only import the data which I really need. So we have a bridge table here, a sales table, a trainer table, and a trainings table. Let's actually import those. Let me tick those options, all of them for now, all those 4. And then let's actually go to the load option and load this into the model itself. So just a second, and let's see what this data looks like. So when we're good to go, relations detected, loaded. So let me go to the model view, and let's just see what this data looks like. So Power BI was smart enough to pick this up already immediately. So the idea here is, let me upgrade for now, working with this bridge table. Because by default, the structure is the following. You get here various tables like trainer. The trainer table here, if I go to the view, let's just explore this. This trainer table contains trainer names like Tyrion Lannister, Jon Snow, Daenerys Targaryen, and Eddard Stark. And all those trainers have trainer IDs. Now, in another table, which is in this case our trainings table, the trainings table have a training ID, a training name, and also the number of trainers attached to each of those trainings. Like Power BI has 3 trainers, Tableau has 2 trainers, and Excel has also 3 trainers. And then we have another table next to the trainings and the trainers, which is the sales table. And the sales table contains a date here, which is this one here, sales, and the training ID for the sales and training. That means that because we have within the sales table here, we have here a training ID, and in the trainings table, we have a training ID, this one here. We can easily connect those, right? So to know exactly what are the sales for each of the trainings. Well, let's do that. Let's actually visualize it. If we go to the training setup, so there are the trainings. And if I go to the training name, if I take this option, and then also have a look at the sales for the training, click on here, and click on the sales, I will see that there are various sales numbers for the training. Let me just increase the size and maybe also format this a little bit. Let's say these are US dollars. And also from the text size here, let's go to 15. So you can see that better on your screens. Just a second. And here we go. So quite easy to set up, right? The structure, because we got the training names and we got the sales numbers. And because if we go back to the model view, and that's important now, the trainings itself have a one-to-many relationship here to the sales. So that is why the trainings here filter the sales. And let's actually get rid of this 1, 2, 3, and so on. That's a little bit disturbing, at least to me. So let me actually right click on the bridge table here, and let's actually rename this as simple bridge. Then go to the sales table, rename it here to sales. We can also do this in the query editor, I know, but I can also do it here. Then I get my trainer, and I go to here, rename, there it is, and say this is my trainer. And then finally I got the trainings. So right click here on the trainings and say I would like to rename this as add trainings. Okay, so I have renamed those tables, and let's go back to the model view, because this is the most important thing to understand here. The trainings can easily filter the sales. So we know we have here the training name, we have here the sales, we can easily display it and visualize that in a report like that. Also in a bar chart and in any other kind of visualization you want to use. So far so good. However, we also have the trainers here. Now the trainers by default, we're not able to link them to the trainings, because for the trainer table, we have a trainer ID and a name. However, in the trainings table, we do not have any relations to the trainer. That is why we have this separate table in here, which is the bridge table created. This bridge table is a very important table because it allows us to connect the trainers to the trainings. So you see that the bridge table itself, let's actually visualize what this looks like. Bridge, here it is, only contains 2 columns. So it maps, basically, it's kind of a mapping table. Kind of VLOOKUP if you have an Excel background, right? Or any kind of mapping table if you come from any kind of SQL database background. And this table allows us here to do the mapping to create a relationship, because we have on the one column the training IDs and on the other column the trainer IDs. So we map the trainers to a specific training. And with the help of this bridge table, we are able to connect the trainer table to the trainings. So this is the first important thing to understand, because oftentimes you do not have this bridge table. And when you have a setup like only the trainer, the trainings in our case, and the sales, and you need to create a model, it might be the case that you need to create this bridge table on your own, just to enable this kind of relationship between the tables, to set up this model structure, okay? So then you can set up the bridge table. However, the bridge table itself is kind of helpful, but it is not sufficient. And I'm going to show you what I mean. If I go to the report here, and now let's actually visualize, say, I'd like to know, I have my trainer names. So let's actually take this option here. And for the, sorry, not the training names, the trainer names, go to the trainer here, take the trainer names. I have my trainers here, and also increase the text size. Go to the values here and go to 15. Here we go. Now I would like to know, I see the sales for the trainings, but I would like to know the sales for each of the trainers. So how can I do that? Well, kind of simple, right? I could also click on the sales here to create the same kind of table I have up here. Well, does this work? Let's do this. Let's click on the sales here, and we see we got 1.35 million and so on. So the complete number, actually the total of the sales, but for all the trainers. Why is that? Well, the reason is we go back to the model structure here and take a look what the model currently looks like. So we got a one-to-many relationship, which means that the trainer table is able to filter the bridge table. That is true. But then we get a many-to-one relationship from the bridge table to the trainings table, and then a one-to-many relationship to the sales table. So that means that the trainings with the one-to-many relationship, this one, is able to filter the sales table. And that is why in the model, a view like that, where you see the training names and then the sales, is quite easy setup. However, the relation from the trainer to the sales, this does not work in the current setup, because, as I said, the trainer filters the bridge, but the bridge table does not filter the trainings, and therefore not filtering the sales. So we have a break in here, right? Because the many side is not filtering the one side. Now, how can we deal with this? Well, an easy answer might be, you might think of, well, I double click here, and then I simply say, instead of having here a single cross filter direction, I go here and say both. So if you tick this option and you click OK, what you now basically do is you set up a bidirectional filtering here, so that the many side is also filtering the one side, and therefore the trainings, on the other hand, can filter the sales. And if you do this like that and go back to the view, you will see that now you see here sales for each of those trainers. And just by the way, if you're wondering why Tyrion Lannister is showing this 1.35 million, the simple reason is that Tyrion Lannister is trainer for all the trainings. That is why you can see this number here. And that is also why those numbers, those individual numbers, are not adding up to 1.3 million. Let me just quickly show this to you. So if I go to the trainer name here, take this option and go to the training name, take this option, then you see here, just as an example, I'll make this bigger, just to understand why those values are appearing the way they do. So go to 15 here, 15. You see that here, if I sort for the trainer name, that's fine. I can see that the nearest Targaryen is trainer for Excel and Power BI, right? So obviously the sales for Excel is 142,000 plus Power BI 1.06 million should be 1.2 million, more or less. And this is exactly the number you can see here. For Eddard Stark, he's only trainer in Tableau. So if I go to a stack, I can set Tableau here. And for Tyrion Lannister, as I said, I got Excel, Power BI, and Tableau. So he is the one and only. He can do everything. So that is why you can see here the sum of those three numbers for him. This is 1.35 million, which is exactly this number here, or the sum of all of these three. So that works. So you could say, okay, then I simply go with this solution and make this bidirectional here, this relationship. So basically filtering in both directions. This is something I would not recommend to do. So these filters are expensive. At first, they are not really, considering performance, they are bad. So a single relationship is always better. And the second one, which might be an even bigger issue, especially if you have a more complex model than this simple structure we have here, is that these relationships might create ambiguity in your model. And this means that there are various filter directions to filter data. So there's not only one way, but several ways, because you set up the relations in both ways. And this means if you then filter the data in the report, you might end up with values and results which are completely wrong. And the reason for this is because the ambiguity in the model, which means that this is not like I have my training table and this filters this table, but this would mean I have maybe another relationship using across other tables, which also filters the sales table, and then I end up with completely strange results. And you want to avoid this as much as you can. That is why this bidirectional relationship is something you should not do. In case you can avoid it, try to avoid it as much as possible. Okay, so we can't do this, or we should not do this. What are alternate ways to solve this? Let me first double click here and change it back to normal, to the single mode here. Click OK. All right, here we go. And now let's go back to our model. Click this option here. And we can see we got this issue again, right? So we see the sales here, but the total sales for all of our different kinds of trainers here. So the first solution is to create this bidirectional filter option, but only in a specific calculation. So using DAX. This is much safer and better way. So let's do that. Let's right click on one of the tables. Doesn't matter in this case where you create the measure. So let me right click maybe on here on the trainer. Let's go with the trainers here, or go with the bridge. Right click on the bridge, it's first table. Click on a measure. And now let's create this measure. Go in here. Let me zoom in so you can see that better. The measure itself will be the cross filter. Okay, cross filter is equal to, and I want to use the calculate function, calculate, and then the expression will be total sales, which we have not calculated so far. So let's say simply the sum of the sales. Okay, like that. Let me close this here. Let's just see sum of the sales table, the sales column. Here we go. And now, as a filter, we will use the cross filter function. It's a modifier, because if I take this option, you see, what it does is it needs two columns, a left column and a right column, and then you can specify the filter direction type. like we have seen with the single or both. These are the two options. And here we say, okay, I'd like to go from my training ID. So training ID from the bridge table, this one here, training ID. And I want to connect this to the training ID from the trainings. Training ID from the trainings. So where is that? Trainings, training ID. There it is. And then we set the relation to both. This one here. And then we can close this option here. And we also need to close the calculate function. So that's that. And maybe for formatting options, go in here to new line and basically do it like that. That's fine. Okay. So that's basically the formula we have. So we evaluate the sales, but this time in a modified context. And the context here is only a modifier of the relationship itself. We say we would like to have a bidirectional relationship, so cross filter in both directions, but only for this specific DAX expression between the bridge table training ID and the trainings training ID. And we use those two columns. Let me actually first evaluate that. And let's go back to the model view just to see it, because we do it between those two columns here, right? If I hover over that, the training ID from a bridge table and the training ID from the trainings. And if we do this, if we go back to the report here, and let's actually visualize our cross filter. So our first solution we have here, we can simply go into or tick this option cross filter. And now we see values in here, which are not formatted. So tick this option, go to the dollar symbol here, and this would give us exactly the same results as we had before, right? So these are the values, and you can see they are filtered. And as an example here, Lannister still shows this 1.35 million, because this is actually what he generated, because he's trainer for all the three trainings. So this works, and it's much safer. That's the first solution I can present you here. Now let me show you two additional ways how we can solve this problem. So the first thing is using context transition. So let me right click on the bridge table here and go to new measure. And for this measure here, okay, that's fine. I will first calculate the rows using the count rows function in the bridge table itself. So let's call that simply count rows bridge is equal to, and simply a count rows function of a table, and the table is the bridge table. So our bridge table. And that's it, the whole formula. We simply store the amount of rows in the bridge table in this count rows bridge. Let's press enter. And that's the measure we have. And now we need a second calculation. So right click on the bridge table here and go to new measure. And call this context transition, because this is actually what happens under the hood here. Context transition is equal to, let me go to new line, and let me define a variable here. So var underscore filtered table is equal to, and we say we use the filter function as a base table. We are referring to our trainings, so trainings, and then the filter expression will be referring to the count rows bridge, which we have calculated just a minute ago. So where's it? Count rows bridge, this one. And this should be greater than 0. And that's it. And this is the filter table we store in this. And this allows us basically to filter the bridge table based on the trainings, so that only the rows in the bridge table remain where we actually have a trainer. We'll see this in a minute in this visual. And let me now return something. Remember, when you use the bar keyword, you need to return something. So use return here. And we want to calculate. So we go to a new line in here, calculate. And the expression will be our total sales, which we have not created the total sales measure. That's why I'm using the sum of my sales column here directly, like that. I can close this. And then as a filter expression, so basically as a table, remember the filter and calculate always tables. And we can here insert the variable, so our filter table, like that. Let's close this, and let's evaluate this measure. Let's click on here, and then let's just see what we get. Okay, there's the measure, and then actually visualize that. At first, let me select it and also click on a dollar symbol, so at least that the formatting is the same. And now go to the table and click this option, and we see we get exactly the same values here, as we have in the cross filter as well, right? So without changing in the model view the relation between those tables, we still got a many to one and one side. So we have not changed it here. Our model structure is perfectly fine, but still we are able to filter within the trainer or given the trainer name, get the total sales by actually creating a filter option here using the context transition, which we have done in the second solution to this problem, right? To get exactly the same values. So that works as well. And then there's one final solution I'd like to share with you, which might be the most easiest one, considering the formula at least. But still, I think it's helpful to know also these other tools. Okay? My final solution, which I would probably recommend you to do as well, is here using the bridge table directly within the filter context. Which means that the measure itself is simply, I call it using the bridge, okay? The bridge is equal to, and I want to use that calculate function. Again, we need an expression, which in our case is the sales. So we're using the sum of the sales column in the sales table, this one. And then as a filter, we do not define a table and filter this table, which we've done with count rows as an example. We also do not use any kind of modifier, like we use the cross filter. Instead, we simply put in the bridge table directly in here. So we give it the bridge table as a filter table. And that's it. Let me close this, and we are good to go. So that's the whole formula for that. So evaluate the sum of the sales, but in the context of the bridge. And if you press enter as the third solution, and also as long as the measure is selected, take the dollar symbol to have the format already applied. And let's do that. Let's actually click here inside and visualize it, and you can see we got exactly the same results. So that's the third solution to this problem. And all of them work. So the normal sales are still showing all the sales, but the cross filter solution, which was the first one, let me show you this one more time, is this one here using cross filter as a modifier for the calculate. This works, and I think it's quite intuitive. Another way, which I think is not that intuitive, is actually using context transition. So this one here is a little bit difficult to understand, at least from my point of view, but it still works, as you can see here. And the final one is probably, considering the formula, the most easiest one, which is using a bridge table directly within the filter context for the calculate function. And you see that it returns exactly the same results here as well. So all these three options you have seen here are valid, and all give you exactly the same result and the correct solution, instead of using here the default model without the specific relation. And all of them, no matter which of them you choose at the end of the day, all of them are the better option than going to the model and modify here this filter direction to both. Okay, I would not recommend you to do that, especially if you have a more complex model. But in general, I would try to avoid bidirectional as much as possible, because as I said, you might end up with results which make no sense, and you sometimes don't even know how they are calculated. So that's it for this video. So hopefully this little excursus here into the relations, also in this bridge table, thing was something kind of interesting to you, and hopefully you can use this and remember this for your future Power BI projects. So that's it for this video. It was a long video, but hopefully it was worth it. As always, thanks a lot for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys. Hey friends, welcome back to the next video. Now let's explore the sales ranking of our employees. Now this time we're gonna do it a little bit differently. So we will go with calculated columns. So remember, in Power BI, next to measures, we also have the option to use columns and calculate, or create DAX measures based on calculated columns. So that means that within a table, if I go to the data view here, in a table like the employees table here, I can actually add another column in here based on the DAX calculation. And the way to do it is simply in the table tools, if you have the table selected, click on new column. Right? So write a DAX expression that creates a new column in the selected table and calculates values for each row. And by the way, you could also go to the report view here and then right click on the table and also create the new column like that. Or you simply select the table and you would also see the ribbon table tool here and also add the new column here. I just do it here directly in the data view because then we see exactly the result immediately. Now, as I said, we will do a ranking based on sales for our employees here. So let's figure out who is the top employee, whether it's Daenerys Targaryen or any of the other ones. So what I do is I click on new column here, and there is the column. And then of course here we can give it a name. Let's call it employee ranking is equal to, and then I will go to new line and press Shift Enter to go to new line and use the rank X function. So rank X is an iterator, and then I need to give it a table. Now rank X is most often used with the all function because this ensures always that we remove any kind of filter context. That's why I will do it here as well. So using the all, and then referring to any kind of table. In this case, it's the employees table because we want to rank the employees in the employees table. And then, of course, the second argument will be the expression. In our case, the expression will be the total sales because I want to rank them based on the total sales number. But of course, you could also refer to any other kind of measure if you want to do that. Then the value is optional, and I will skip this. The order itself is interesting to us because we would like to sort this descending to make sure that the employee with the highest amount of sales is ranked number 1. And then for the ties, you could add dense or skip. However, it's not really necessary because, at least in this data set, there are no 2 employees which are exactly the same amount of sales. So then I can skip this as well. And that's basically the ranking we need to do. And if I press enter, we maybe just make this smaller first. And now let's evaluate the formula, press enter, and let's see what we get. And you see we got the ranking. And we can easily see that Sons of Stark here is ranked number 1 here, right? And so on. And then Garian is now, okay, employee ranking number 3. So far so good. And now we would like to add another column based on this column and see, or basically rank our employees. Let's say we group them together. And we group them based on, let's say, the top 3 employees, and then we have additional grouping, and then the employees with the least amount of sales, which are, well, we have to improve them, right? Or have to talk to them just to get their sales ranks up. So, okay, let's do that. Let's actually create another column. So let me right click one more time on the employees table, and here create column, new column, or you do it up there at the ribbon bar. And there's a second calculation we want to do. And for this column, we call it employee classification, like that. There's an I missing, I think, so spell it correctly. Okay, is equal to, and I go to new line, and you use an expression we have used before, which is the switch true. Switch true, also a very helpful expression, a combination of 2 formulas, the switch and the true. And because then we can simply check the various values, and if one of this is correct, then we can return a result for the specific value. So we say switch true, and then we go inside the employees table, so in the ranking itself, so employees table, and you see, because we have created the column, we can now pick it up here. So we can simply use the value itself, so the rank value, and then check whether it's, let's say, if it's less or equal to 3, then it would be the top employees, let's call them top, or top 3. Then the next criteria would be that if the ranking, so there's a comma missing, so here, okay, line, if the ranking, go to ranking one more time, is then, let's say, it's less or equal to 6, then let's say average, and finally we got the employee, and one more time referring to the ranking, and say otherwise. By the way, we could say now if it's less than 1000 to a really high number, to check that if you do not know exactly, specify the number in the table itself. Or we actually could remove this completely and say we simply go with the else. As you can see here in the switch, the last argument up there is the else. So if none of these apply, none of this is true, then we can use a default value here. And let's say this will be bottom, okay? Let's call it bottom. Like that. And then you can close the switch function and you're basically done with that. And the reason why this works basically is because it goes through the checks here one line by line. So at first it checks whether it's less or equal to 3. And if this is not the case, only then it goes to the next line, right? Because otherwise it could be here as well as here, right? So it could be top and average. But it checks really line by line. And only if the first is not true, then it goes to the second. Okay, so we got it. And let's actually evaluate it. Let's press enter to calculate that. And then let's just see what we get. and here is actually the ranking, and we see 3 is top, 2 and 1 is also top, then starting from 4 is average, and then the final ones 7, 8, and 9. These are the bottom ones. Okay? And now we have basically created this classification here. And now, of course, we can use this column. A calculated column can be used in a visual, pretty easy. So if I go back to the report, let's create a simple visual here, go to new page, just to show you that we can use this now. So let's say I go with the donut chart one more time, I tick this option, and here I'd like to see the sales figures. So that's why I will go with total sales. So total sales, here we go, take this option, and then let me just remove the filter here and go with our employee classification, which we have calculated, right? So this one here. And you can either drag it to the legend, or you can simply tick it and it's added to the legend here. And now we see here the employee ranking. And we can see that, for instance, our top employees, so the top 3 employees, accounted for almost 50% of the sales. So just in case you can't see that, let me just briefly make this a little bigger, considering the labels, so detail labels, and say I'd like to see a text size of, I don't know, 15, more. And here we see basically the results, right? And of course, you can also now adjust the legend, where you want to place it, make it bigger, what exactly you want to show here, only the absolute numbers, the percentage numbers, and so on. So all this can be, for instance, here now styled, but the main point really was to create a calculated column, do a ranking, and then use this specific column, or basically classification of the employees, within the measure. And this can be easily put on a legend, right? Like this one we've done here. And this is sometimes something you can't do directly with measures. So if that's the case, then the calculated column would be the way to go. Otherwise, if you can avoid using calculated column and do it in a measure instead, I would always go with the measure, because the main advantage of the measure is it is calculated on the fly. That means it's not part of the original model itself. It doesn't contain any, or does not use any space in the model, which means the more calculated column you create, the bigger the model size. And normally you want to avoid this. However, sometimes you can't do that, and then you can, of course, create calculated columns. And also, in small models, it doesn't matter. I mean, you can easily create 1 or 2 or a few additional columns that would really not be any issue here. But I just wanted to mention that if you have a big model, your report is slow, and so on, I would try to go with measure. It saves a little space of the model, okay? So that's it for this video. Hopefully that was helpful. As always, thanks a lot for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys. Hello and welcome back to the next idea I'd like to show you, which is implementing parameters in your Power BI reports. So let's actually first create a new page here, and let's visualize one more time our customers. So I will go from the orders table here with the customer company, those names, and I also like to share or show their sales directly in the visual. And I go with the table one more time because it's most easy to see there. However, as I said numerous times before, this would apply to any kind of visual you use. So let's actually increase the size here, that you see that better on your screens. Let's go to values here, and let's go to 15, okay? So far so good. Now what we see here is the total sales amount for a specific customer here, right? Across the whole time frame. That's basically currently the status. Now let's say we would like to actually, reduce the time frame. So instead of seeing the sales across the whole time frame, let's say I only want to see the sales for the last X days. And the X should be dynamic. So could be 200, could be 30, could be whatever. In order to do this and also enable this to the end consumer of the report, we need to add a parameter here. And this parameter will be used then in our formula. So I will go to under modeling here, and under modeling, there's an option to add a parameter, this new parameter option here. You see it's a what if, so could also be used for what if analysis and scenarios. What if parameters let you see how your data behaves under different conditions, add them to reports as slices, or reference them in DAX expressions. So both are useful ways to apply them. So let's click at first on the parameter here to create one, and then you can give it a name. So let's call this maybe last X days. And then it should be a whole number, that's fine. And then you can specify a minimum value as well as a maximum value here. So let's say the maximum value is 200 as an example. And then you can say, what's the increment? So is it from 10 to 20? So is increment 10, or is it 1? Then you start from 1, then 2, and so on. I leave it 1 as a default, and here you can also add a default value directly if you want to do that. For me, that's totally fine. I just leave it empty for now. And this checkbox allows us now to add a slicer to the page. So let's click OK to do that. And then the parameter is created, or actually a table is created. You can see it here, last X days. And we have our slicer here, right? Or the slider, if you want to call it this way, which allows us now to specify the amount of days. However, so far, of course, nothing happens, right? Because it's not linked to any kind of measure we have. But we will use it just in a second. At the beginning, I just want to show you here the last X days, so the table itself, which is generated, because it is generated using a DAX expression, which is this generate series. So you can also create this yourself if you want to do that. And you see that basically what you get is a unique column here with starting from 0 and ending 200 at the bottom. So if I scroll to the bottom, 200 days, because this was the frame we initiated. Of course, you can adjust this manually. I could have done 360 or whatever I want. Can simply change it here. And here also the increment, which is currently 1, which are exactly the settings we have set up when we created the parameter. Okay, so we have our parameter. And now I first would like to calculate the last day of sales. Now I know for a fact that we also already used the max function for the max order date here. Let me just zoom in so you can see that one more time. However, I want to share with you as many DAX options I can. So that is why we go with the last date function here. And we also will use a modified filter context to ensure that we always get the latest date in the orders table. So let's do that. Let me right click on the measures table here. Right click and create a new measure. And let's create another way, or see another way how we can create this maximum order date, which then is completely free or removes any kind of filtering. So we say this is the, let's say, last sales day or max order date. You can also name it this way, but then you need to name it 2 because we already have the name and you can only use a name for measure once. So last day, sales day, and I want to calculate something. Calculate, the expression will be the last date. Here it is. Returns the last non-blank date. That's what it does. Then we need to give it some kind of column, so date column. In this case, I'm referring to the order date. So from the orders table, the order date. And I want to make sure that I remove any kind of filters which might have been applied. In this case, there are no filters from the dates table or from the order date because we got the customer itself. However, we need to be aware that actually the last day or the last order date could be different for each of the customers, right? So that is why it makes sense to wrap this in a calculate function and then remove any kind of filters which might have been applied. So we use the all function and refer to the orders table here directly. Even though in this case it would also be sufficient if you just remove from the orders table the column of the specific customer company. That would also work. However, in this case, because my model is also small and I can use the all from the orders table directly. So let's do it this way and let's close the calculate function and press enter. And let's just see how that evaluates. But this should actually return the 6th of May, which is the last order day for all the customers. So let's do that. Let's go to last. Where is it? I can find it. Here it is. If I take this, click on the table first, and then I can tick this option, and then I would see here the formatting is not quite nice because there's also time here, but you see that it's the 6th of May for all locations in here, right? So there's no difference considering the different kinds of customers we have in here. So let me just remove it. It was just to show you that it actually returns the last day for all the customers and exactly the same one. And now we can use this in our final expression. So let me right click on the measures table here and create new measure. Here we go, just a second. And then let's write our formula here and say this will be total sales last X days. That is equal to, then go to new line. And I want to calculate the total sales. Calculate because we want to modify the context. We want to make sure that we use a filter table of our dates table. So I'm using the filter function the filter function allows us to filter a table. So instead of using the complete table, we give it at first the table itself. So it's the dates TBL, date TBL, here we go. And we want to filter this dates table down to ensure that actually the dates here, or from the date table, the date, so date table, the date, here we go, this one, is greater than the last day, so last sales day, this one here, minus the specific time period we defined in our last X days. So last X days, the value itself, this one. And at the same time, so double ampersand here, we want to make sure that the dates table or date, this one, is less or equal to the last day of sales. Here we go. Okay, not so nice formatted, I admit that, but let's actually maybe go here in a new line, have the filter on here, and last day minus day, and also maybe go here into a new line. And this looks already, at least from my point of view, a little bit better. So let me just, I think it does not pick this up correctly, so let me just remove this. Okay, and I think it has an issue like that. Let's just see, last 6 days value. Oh, it didn't pick this up correctly. Here we go. That should actually be like that. Okay, and just remove this one. Okay, that had some issues here, but now we should be good to go. Let me actually then go here and have it like that. Okay, so we got our expression. So what do we do here? Well, we calculate the total sales, but in a modified context. So in a reduced dates table, not the complete dates table, and we make sure that the date is greater than the last day minus the interval we specify by using our parameter, right? So let's say we got 30 days for the last X days, the parameter value here. Then we would ensure that we start from the 6th of May, so our last sales day, minus 30, so 1 month back, more or less. And we want to have all the dates greater than last day minus 1 month up to the last day, so the 6th of May, which will always be our last date, and also included because we said less or equal to. Okay, so let's actually evaluate that after we close the calculate function. So just a second. Here we go. Okay, so make sure that you close parentheses here. Now press enter, and we should be good to go. And now if we also go back to our table here, and now add this here as well. Okay, and now we can see the values here, right? So now depending on the slider, you will see whatever we change here, that these values will change. So if I make it smaller, then of course there will be less values, and they will be smaller, of course. If I make this even smaller, then you see there are even less values, and a few of them are empty. That simply means, for instance, if I have here the last 31 days, that means that, for instance, those customers here, those two, have not ordered anything, and therefore there are no sales generated. And if I make it bigger, then of course, if I have more days, so my time frame is bigger, and of course, then I would see more sales for the customers, but still less than sales generated across the complete time frame, right? And that is how you can use this kind of slider parameter and do some kind of more dynamic visualizing your results. And of course, also edit it here directly if you want to edit that value here. So if I say here 200, like that, press enter, then this would also work. So that's it basically. So this would now give us the option to use a slider here and ensure to see only the sales which have been, well, created in the last X days. Okay. So that's it for this video. Hopefully that was more interesting to you. Hopefully you were able to follow. If you have any questions regarding this, feel free to ask. Otherwise, thanks a lot for watching. I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys. Alright, welcome back to a really short video, but very important because often asked. If you have created your Power BI report like that, and you want to export the data to Excel, so not the visuals itself, you want to export actually the underlying data. So what I mean is, as an example, I have any kind of visualization, could be a donut chart like that, or could be a simple table like that. It doesn't matter. But I want to export the data. How do I do that? Well, if you go to the visual itself and hover over it, you see your three dots here, right? So you can click on the more options, and maybe you have spotted that already. You can actually export this data. Now, if you tick this option, then the window should appear, and you see that you can export it as a CSV file. Now, what you basically export here is the underlying data for this visual within the specific context it currently has. That means, as an example, if I go to, let's just see, where did we have that here for an example? Here we used currently, or apply currently, the filter of 2020. That means that if I now go to this visual here and go to the three dots here and export the data to CSV file, then I would only export the data within the visual for the current filter context, which means 2020. So 2019 data and 2021 data would not be implemented. Also, you see that, at least right now, you can only export a CSV file, not as an Excel file, for instance. However, if you want to actually get the data, the complete data, into Excel, you could do the following. You can go to the data view here, and if you take a look at the data itself, you can right-click on one of the columns, and then you should see that you can either copy a specific column you currently have selected, or you can copy a table. So if you click on Copy Table, and you would go to Excel, you would be able to copy-paste the whole table into Excel. Okay? So these are the exporting options you basically have. So if you want to do it this way, you can do it directly from your Power BI report. Later on in the service, there's also other options to export the data. But as long as you are here in the Power BI desktop, these are options to get the data into CSV format or directly into Excel by copying the complete table. Okay? So that's it for this video. As I said, it's a short video, but it is very often asked, and so it's crucial that you know that. Okay? So thanks for your attention, and see you in the next video. Until then, best guys. Well, hello and welcome to another tip, idea, trick, whatever you want to call it, in DAX I'd like to share with you. And this is how you can do an advanced search. So let me first import the data. You see that I have here opened a complete new Power BI file. And if I go to Excel here to import the data, or click on Excel here, I can then refer to the file I'm using. Here, this is searching with DAX, and you'll find the same file in the resource section to follow along. Now, if I tick this option and click on Open, then I just need to wait for the connection, and then we see what we have inside. It's a pretty simple table, but it helps us to understand the basic concept. So here we go. We got our trainings table and the trainings itself. So this is referring to the complete Excel sheet, but I like to import the table. This is best practice. And if I take this option here, then I see that there are the trainings, so 1 to 5, and then I can see the tools which have been used during those trainings. So Power BI here, Tableau, Power BI and Excel, Power BI, ClickView, Power BI, and Tableau and Lumira. So this is it. So let's actually load this data and then also visualize this in the report and explain a little bit what we are trying to do using DAX here. So just a second, we load the data and it is available to us. So let's go to the tool and then also to the training. Okay, here we go. And we got the tool and the trainings, and that is fine actually. So trainings, this is the total summary of that. So let me actually go in here and right click on, I think, which is here, this trainings, and say I don't want to summarize it. Okay, like that. That is fine. So I got Power BI here, 1.3, because it's appearing twice, that was summed up here, but this is not what I want. Okay, I want to see the unsummarized values in here. So let me also increase the text size so you see that hopefully better on your screens. Go to 15 here. So these are the trainings. Now the idea is that we at first create another table, which is our slicer table, where we can then select something. And then based on our selection, I'd like to see within this tools here all the trainings where this tool has been used. So as an example, if I tick Power BI here, I'd like to see training number 1 here, training number 3, but also training number 4, and also training number 2, because they also include Power BI, even though there are also other tools used. Okay? You can sort this, by the way. Okay, here we go. So the idea is to search the specific text string we have here. Because if I now would filter on Power BI, then of course I would only get those two results, right? So as an example, if I go to the tool itself, of course I can use that, go to the slicer option here, click on the tool, and because these two are connected, now if I check Power BI here, which will be the first tool, I would only see those two, but not the other ones, right? So that's something we would like to avoid. So the first thing is, let me actually remove this, and here remove, and create an additional table with a unique list of all the products, because otherwise I would not be able to search for the specific product only by selecting one product here. I don't have a unique list currently for all the specific products in here. So let's actually go to, in this case, enter data under home. So because this allows us to use a custom table we define. If you have them already, then of course you can also import them, but here I don't have it. So let me create it here. Let's call this slicer as a table, and then I can use Power BI here. The next one would be Tableau. Then we have Excel for the training, Excel. Then we have another one here for ClickView. And finally we have here also Lumira, right? Which is also included in here. Okay, so we got the 5 entries. And of course you can name this table somehow. Maybe we should name it Slicer Table, okay? Slicer Table. Or let's call it Tools. No, tools we already have, let's call it Slicer Table. Slicer Table. TBL. Okay, so now we can load this, click on load, and then this table gets loaded into the model. Just a second, and there it is, it's available for us. So one thing I'd like to make sure is that this slicer table has no relationship to the training table. So if I go to the model view, just to check that, to make sure, and that is the case. And for me, I have to still click on this upgrade now button. You probably in the future don't have to do it, and you would see this window here in the view immediately. But okay, so far so good. I got 2 tables, and they're separated, no connection. Okay, so now, if I go back in here, I can go to my slicer table and click the slicer option. And of course now, let me also maybe adjust this a little bit. At first it should not be a table, it should be a slicer. And then under the general section, I could play around with it. For instance, the orientation, I go horizontally, and then I would see all those in here. Maybe make this a bit smaller and see all of them here next to each other, right? And I can search for any of them if I want. Okay, maybe increase also the size of it a lot. Items here, go with the text size here, maybe 12, something like that, okay? I mean, you should see it, font color, make it black, like that, but no, I think it's visible. So if you tick one of the options, like Excel, as an example, or Power BI, of course, nothing would happen so far, right? Because the tables are simply not connected. Okay, so let's connect them using a measure, basically a filter expression, which helps us now to click on Power BI as an example, and then see all the tools, or in this case, trainings, which have been used here, or the tools, the trainings which have been used in Power BI, or where Power BI has been used. So let me at first right-click on one of the tables. In this case, it doesn't matter which one. We create simply one measure, then new measure here, and let's just there it is, and let's do our advanced search with DAX. Now we will call it, let's say, filter is equal to, and then let me go to new line, and let's check something. We say if condition, and then we say the sum x function as an iterator function here of our slicer, so slicer table, and here we need to have an expression. So we iterate over the slicer table, and we want to make sure that when we search function allows us to search for specific text within a text, and then add a starting position and a not found value if you want. Now, what we do is the following. We search in the text of the training name here, or the tool itself. So we search for, at least actually we search here for the specific tool from the slicer, and we search within this, the training name itself, right? Whether we find it or not. So let's do that. Let's search for the text from the slicer itself. So slicer, this one here. And where? Well, we use the maximum here from our trainings table. So trainings table, the tools. like that. And then we can close this here. And then we want to specify not a start position. We start from the first letter, but a not found value. And we say the not found value will be 0, okay, like that. And then we can close this here, the search, and we can also close the SUMX function here. And then we simply check whether this result is greater than 0. And if this is the case, then we return true, true. And if this is not the case, then we return false. And then we can close the function and we are basically good to go. The only thing is, of course, always the formatting of. So you can maybe go in here like that. And then we also maybe do another line break in here like that. Okay. And that should be it. So what we do here one more time is we are searching for a specific string, so a text value, coming from the slicer table. Okay. And we search within the table tools, and the maximum here from these tools simply means that for each row in this table, the maximum will always be the same value in the row. So the maximum for the first row will be Power BI, the maximum from the second row will be Tableau, Power BI, and Excel, and so on. So that's how that works. And you can easily check this if you only use the max here, or this expression here, and simply copy it, paste it in another measure as an example, and then evaluate it here if you simply add it to the table. And the search here means that we search for the value itself within this, and search only means actually only returns whether it finds something or not. And if that is the case, we said that here if we do not find something, we want to return 0. And then we simply iterate here with the SUMX function over this table here, or over the findings, and make sure that we want to have a value greater than 0, because we said if we don't find anything, then return the 0. Now let's evaluate that. Press enter to create the formula. Okay. And now let's actually see whether we get what we want. So what we need to do in order to apply the filter now to this visual, or whatever kind of visual you want to use, we need to add our filter, which we've created, into the filter pane. So in this case, in the section for the specific visual, so we can drag the filter and drop it actually on filter on this visual. So here inside, add it. And then we only need to make sure that we filter to the true values. So we say, in this case, is, and then we can search here for true, right? So is true, like that. And now if I press OK or apply filter, then we are good to go. And now if you filter something, let's say I filter for Power BI, if I click Power BI, then you see you get all the values here which include Power BI. So here Power BI, Power BI, Power BI, and Power BI. And if I untick this, you see that Tableau and Lumira were removed. If I tick on Tableau as an example, I would get Tableau, Power BI, Excel, and also Tableau Lumira. So this filter works exactly the way we structured it. So to make sure that we click on a tool, and as long as the tool is included in the training, no matter where the position is, where the search function will return a value, and then the search result will be greater than 0. And if that's the case, then this filter here, which we've designed here, will evaluate to true. And we said that the visual itself, I'll take this here, the visual itself should always have, let me take this option here, should always evaluate to true in here, okay? And as long as this filter is applied, then we can basically filter from our slicer table, the trainings table. And that's it for the advanced search with DAX. So hopefully that was helpful and interesting to you. I just would encourage you, try it out yourself and play around with the file from the resource section if you want. And thanks a lot for watching. Can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys. Hey friends, welcome back. Now let's talk about how we can add animations to our Power BI report. Well, there is a neat little visual which can help us doing this called Play Access. However, in order to use it, because it's a custom visual, we need to import it first from App Source. Now we have two options to do that. We can either go to More Visuals here and click on From App Source, or you could click on the 3 dots and go there to get more visuals. Both ways work. However, you need to be aware that in order to do this, you need to be logged into Power BI. And a login requires registration, of course, and you can only register here with either your corporate email or some kind of institutional email you have. You could also use email provider if you have, for instance, your own website. Then this could also, your own domain, this could also work. However, you can't do it with your private email address. It won't work. Just wanted to mention this here. So if I click on Get More Visuals, I can go there, and then you can see here I'm in App Source. And for now, I just leave that here, and I can search for any kind of visual here. You can also categories here, and also editor speaks, and so on. But what we want to use here is the play axis. So if you search for play, then there's the play axis, dynamic slicer, and that's what we want to use. So let me click on Add here, and you'll see that it gets downloaded. Yes, it's added now, and you see it here appearing, right? The play axis here. Now this is available, but only in this report here for now. If you want to add it to your visuals, you can right click here and also pin to visuals pane, and it will also appear up here, right? Could also be the case. If you right click on here, you can also unpin it again if you want. But now it's added here to the visualization section. We can use it in our reports. And now let's actually visualize something. So let's say we go with any kind of, let's say, dates table here. I go for the date column, and then I want to visualize any kind of development, let's say for the total profit. Click on total profit, and let's switch here to a bar chart as an example, right? So let's use this one here. Okay, and we got our bars, and maybe we'd like to drill in a little bit further at least, like that for instance, so we can see all the months. And let's make this bigger, and also add maybe the labels here. Go here and go to the data labels, turn them on, and now we can see them here as well. Maybe we'd also add them into the bars itself. So if I go to the position here and say inside end, then I can also see those labels inside. Okay, for me that's fine, but of course you can format this further. Now to use now the play axis, what we could do is we can simply at first deselect everything, then we click on this play axis option here, and then we need to add any kind of field here. And in my case, I could say, as an example, I use my categories here. So if I go to my, just make it smaller here, to my orders table, and add the categories, simply drag and drop it into the field area of the play axis chart or visual. Do that. Now we see what we get. It's simply a play axis here, like the name implies, which here has the category. And so maybe because I got a dark background currently, so go with, let's say here, for the colors, and let's actually go with here where we are white color, like that. Okay, and that may be a little bit easier to see, even though animation settings here, I think that is fine. Here you can specify, do you want to auto start the visual, or does the report consumer need to click actually on the play option here? And also, do you want to loop, so again and again, or do you only want to play it once? Also something you can address here. And also the time interval, which means how fast should this loop be executed. Okay, so show all, that's fine. And here you can specify all of them. So if I go in here, let me actually all make them white for now, just that you see that better. This one here as well, I've done this before. Actually, obviously, this is already a little bit grayed out as I had before. So it seems that this is the same here, but yeah, hopefully you can see it nonetheless. Okay, like that. Maybe the label itself, where's the title? There's the title. And also add this here. I think font should be fine. Actually increase it maybe a little bit. That's category itself. And also add, where can I find this? The label category, here it is. And take this to white. Okay, so at least we can see that. All right, so we are good to go. And for now, we do not use any loop. So let me actually remove the colors here. So loop is off, but we could now run this. And what basically happens is the following. It's like a slicer. So we apply each category as a filter on the visual we have. Currently we only have one visual, but if you have several visuals on the page, then this would be applied to all the visuals, right? And what happens is each category is selected and the chart gets filtered, but automatically. You don't have to do this manually. Let me show this to you. If I click on the play axis here, watch what happens with the bars at the bottom. Take this option, and you see that now we basically loop through. Of course, I need to do the looping here. Okay, and click one more time. And now you see basically we go through the chart like that, right? So hovering over that. maybe one additional thing, let me actually end this for now. And as you've seen here, I don't like the interaction. That is why I will select this here, this option, and then I go to the, where is it? The formatting option here, and go to edit interactions and make sure that I do not highlight it by default, but I want to filter it. So click on the filter option. Okay, it's selected, and now let's try this one more time. Okay, using the loop. Okay, and let's take this option, let's run it, and now you see basically that now it applies here. This option, now run it, and now you see it applies to the visualization at the bottom, right? So it goes through all the different kinds of categories you have and automatically adjusts this and filters them. And because we set the loop to on, you see that it restarts automatically in here. You don't have to do it, you can turn it off if you want, and also either make the time interval larger or smaller, it's also up to you, but the main idea really is to make this dynamic. You simply click on it, and then it runs through that, okay, like that. And displays this a little bit more, well, automatically. That's what I meant with animation. And the great thing here really is that it's very easy to set up. All you need actually is really this new visual here, the play axis, and then you can add any kind of, well, filter from your dimension. And instead of using a normal slicer, you simply use this play axis. And then it's up to you whether you want to loop it or run this automatically. So automatic start would simply mean that no one needs to click here, it automatically runs in your report. And this could be one little feature which is quite neat and might be of interest or might really amaze your audience. So maybe that's helpful to you. In case it is, try it out and see what the reaction is. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys. Hello friends, welcome back to another video. Now let's talk about the Q&A feature in Power BI. The Q&A feature is a neat little feature which is available to all of us, which we can use in order to enhance our report. So maybe you have already experience with it, maybe you've used it in your reports, maybe not. So let's actually dive into it and give a brief introduction on how it works. The Q&A itself is available either here in the visualization pane. So let's check this option first. Click on it, and then you see a visual appears, but this visual is not blank, a blank template like the other ones. It actually has already up here a question bar where you can ask any kind of question to your data, and also some kind of options here, which Power BI provides by default here. Some questions to get started with. And what you do is basically you either write your own question or you take one of the options, and then Power BI is trying to create a visual based on what you have selected or what you have entered here. For instance, if I tick here, top customer countries by total profit, if I tick this option, then you see that by default, Power BI has now created a bar chart for me, which I can use in my report. Now, if I like this visual and I want to keep it and want to convert it into a standard bar chart, then all I need to do is go up here and click on this option. This will convert the Q&A results here into a standard bar chart visual, which you can also get if you go up here and click this option, right, in the visualization. Or you decide that, well, I want to keep this flexible and I leave it like that. And then, of course, you can go back, or the report consumer could go back and ask a different question if he or she wants to change the visual. For instance, I'd say, if I write my own question, let's say total sales by customer name as an example, right? If I click this option here, then I would see here all my customer names and I would see their total sales as an example, right? So you can ask different kind of questions and try to see whether Power BI is able to pick those up, what you asked. The other thing, let me actually click here, or let me show it. If you click this option, as I said before, now you have converted it into a standard visual, which means you can't change it anymore. It simply behaves like a standard bar chart in here. This was the first option, by simply selecting it from here. The second option is simply double-click here in the canvas. Maybe you've done this in the past. The first time I did it was actually by accident, but if you double-click here, you'll see that also the Q&A appears automatically. So that's the second way to create it. And the behavior is the same. You get some basic questions to start with. You can also click on here, show all suggestions, or you can write your own question here. So one additional thing, let me remove this, we don't need it anymore. Additional thing is, you have seen that so far, the visual itself creates twice a bar chart, right? So if I say, let's say total sales by here, let's say customer country, like that, then by default, one more time, I get a bar chart. What if I don't like a bar chart? What if I like to see this as a different visualization type? Then you can also tell Power BI this in the question directly. For instance, if you say total sales by customer country, now as, and now, as you can see here, you can specify what you want to see. For instance, if you say as table, click this option, then you get the table with all the countries. Or you say, let me show it a different way. If I type in as map as an example, I will get here a map, so a country map, default one in Power BI, with all the countries here and their sales with the bubble size highlighted here, right? So you can actually change the type of visual by simply adding this as and then specify what kind of visual you want to have. That also works. Okay, so I just want to encourage you to play around with this and see whether Power BI is smart enough to pick up what you actually asked. So the last way to create this one, Q&A visual, is actually using the Q&A button. So let me make this smaller for now and go under Insert here. And under Insert, there is also the buttons. And next to the default buttons, there's also this Q&A button here. So even though you could add actually the Q&A feature to all the buttons, the same as you can add a bookmark to each button, still I will go with the Q&A button for now. And you see that here is the Q&A, looks like that. And you see that here as an action, the default action for the Q&A is Q&A. But as I said, you could choose any other kind of button if you want and simply add the type Q&A to it. Then it will behave like a Q&A visual as well. And the way it works is, let me maybe style it a little bit. You can go to the button here, button text, and could say this is Q&A, like that. And then you can specify where you want to place it, maybe inside here. This is something you need to play around with and see what works best for you. Increase the text size maybe, like that, as an example. And then you can play around and make this button exactly, or style the button exactly where you want it. For instance, you could go under here, the settings for the default state, that's fine. And let's say if someone hovers over it, I would like to see maybe the text size a little bit smaller, then it looks like someone is pressing something. And maybe I also adjust the font color here and say make it this yellow, and you just see that if you hover over this, now the Q&A becomes yellow and also shrinks a little bit, right? It's like someone clicks on it. And there are various ways how you can style this. Each state, so the default state, the hover state, the press state, and also on the disable state. But I leave this up to you because there are so many formatting options, and this is something you need to try out and figure out which works best for you. The main point is that this Q&A button also behaves like the Q&A visual itself, right? So if you are in the Power BI desktop, like I'm here, you need to hold Control key and click. Otherwise, of course, if you published your report to the service, then of course the end consumer would only click with his or her left mouse button. But if I click on it, hold Control key now, you'll see that also this window appears, and then I can ask any kind of question here, right? Once, one more time, try that or search for it. Specific question here. Once total customer countries by total profit. I tick this option. I see it as a bar chart, and maybe I say okay, as, and then I specify I want to see this as a map. I click on map, and then you see it here as a map, right? It's also something you can do, which might enhance your report, because maybe you are not able to get all the visuals on the report page. Then there are various options how to deal with that. Either, of course, create several report pages, or you use the bookmark functionality, which we learned in the Expand Excellence class, or you dive into the drill through option, or in this case you use Q&A. So various options in Power BI, which is good, which makes it flexible, and also which makes you gives you the option to really customize the report exactly to your own wishes, and maybe also to the audience need, of course. So that is that. Let me close this, and you see that now it's closed. And it really does not take much space, but it's very powerful because it gives a lot of insights. So the last thing I'd like to show you for the Q&A is actually the settings. So if you go in here and click this option, then you see that you got another window which is appearing here, and there are a few additional things which you can customize and also define here. Like getting started is actually only giving you, let's say, the overview of all the things you also find down there in these tabs. Interesting could be the field synonyms. If you tick this option, then you see that you could click of any of the tables. For instance, if I say I go to my date table here, I click this option, then I see all different kinds of columns in this table, and here I can add additional, let's say, synonyms to identify this. So for instance, whenever I say I want to actually refer to the date, I could add a synonym here. I click on here and can say I want to add calendar as an example. And if I press enter, now I added here this term. I also get suggestions here, but I added this term to the date column. So now when I ask a question and I refer to calendar, then I will get actually the date. And I can show this to you. Let me actually close this for now. It's saved. Now I can, you see the Q&A updates here. And now if I remove this for now and say I'd like to search for calendar, and you see that calendar is picking up now, right? If I say total sales by calendar, you see that it picks those up. Those names you have to find. And if I tick this option, then here I get a visual, like development over the date column in here. So this is how easy you can add additional, synonyms to each specific column. So if you say that, for instance, in my data source, specific column has this and this name, but I know for a fact that my report consumers will ask for a different name because this is just common practice in our organization, then you could add those synonyms, and then Power BI would be smart enough to pick those synonyms up. So it's a great help, especially if maybe your column has names based on certain kinds of structures from the underlying data source, which you can change or don't want to change. Let's go one more time in the settings and see what else is there. Next to the field synonyms, there's also this review question option. However, you see that you need to sign in for that. This could be helpful if, let's say, you have published your report with a Q&A feature, and the report is used by a lot of consumers, and then you want to figure out, okay, what actually did my consumers ask in question? This could provide a great insight. If you say, for instance, they asked a lot of questions about this and this topic, so it might be useful to add additional information for this topic directly instead of only providing it as a Q&A. So this could be derived by an insight getting from this review questions you find. So that's really helpful. Then also for the teach Q&A here, as here you can ask additional questions. So maybe Q&A, or it's helpful for Q&A actually if you ask a few questions here up front. So Power BI is smart enough picking up those questions and is better understanding and interpreting those questions. This could be also helpful to teach Q&A up front to make sure that actually the questions from the report consumer will be answered and in a good and correct way. Right? Manage terms is also there. This is just an overview for all the synonyms you have created. In my case, I only did one with calendar and date, but you have here the option to remove it if you don't like it or don't think it's properly anymore, right? And just questions, which is this one here. This is where you can add additional questions here. So everyday language. You have seen this before. So if I close this, you see that if I double click here, for instance, to create one, there are these suggested ones, right? Okay, difficult word. So you can add additional questions by default if you provide them in the settings, as you've seen here, right? If you click here and say suggest questions, and then you write your questions in here, and you also get a preview result already, and then you just need to save it. For instance, I would like to see here, let's say total, let's say total cost by, in this case, customer country. Or by classify customers. That doesn't pick anything up. Okay, so then I go with some default one. Let's say customer country as bar, or as let's say as map. Okay, as map visual like that, and then I can add this total cost by customer country as map. Click on it. It's added. Let me save it, and now it's saved. And now if let me close this for now, and if I working on it, you see that now it's created, And you can see here total cost by customer country as map. So this is my default suggestion now because I only added one of them, but here now this is already available if I create a new Q&A visual. So it might be helpful, especially if you know that your audience has specific questions. You can already ask in advance and provide them here as suggested questions. Might also be helpful to figure out for the audience how to use this visual itself. So that's it actually for a quick introduction into this feature. I think personally it's a great feature and maybe it might be useful to enhance your reports. So now you know how to get started hopefully. As always, thanks a lot for watching and hopefully see you in the next video. Until then, best guys. Hey friends, welcome back. Now in this video I'd like to give you a brief introduction into the synchronization of slicers. So maybe you already know how that works, but if not, let's go through this video. Now let's say I have two report pages and I will set them up, but quite quickly. So let's maybe create a donut chart and go with our, let's say, in the orders table I have my category and then I'd like to visualize the amount like that. Okay, so far so good, and I have a simple donut chart in here. Now, then I add one additional information. Let's say I'm using here a cluster bar chart. I go with my customer countries in here, and I'd like to visualize here, let's say, total sales. Okay, click on here and say the total sales. Here we go. And we got another bar. So that's our page number one. Now let's actually go here, page number two, and create maybe one additional visual or two additional visuals. So let's say here, I'd like to see also a bar chart here, and I'd like to see my, let's say here, the ship modes. Where are they? There's a ship mode, and I'd like to see the total profit by ship mode as an example. Like that, okay? So I can see those bars. Let me select it, make it bigger. I can see those bars in here, place it somewhere. And maybe also add the labels so it's easier to spot that the synchronization actually works. So turn the data labels on and let me make them a little bigger. So increase in size so you can see that better. Let's say 15. Okay. So we can see that these are the total profits for each of the different kinds of ship modes. And the goal now would be that we go to page number one. And if now someone uses a slicer to select something, first we need to create it. Let's actually go in here and go to category and choose here slicer. Here we go. There's our slicer. And I can actually make this bigger. So let me go in here and let me go to the options, go to the general sections, and let's just see horizontally. Okay, here we go. And then also increase the text size, I think, a little bit. Just put this here. I'll remove the header and go to the items and also increase the text size a little bit. Let's say 13. And of course, then we need to make it bigger, otherwise they are not visible. Okay, like that maybe. Okay, so this is our slicer, and let me place it somewhere, like here, for an example. But then I need to move this a little bit to the bottom, and here, and this a little bit to the bottom, and here. So, not the prettiest report, of course, but that's not the point here. Now the idea is, if I click on cheese as an example here, I can see that the data gets filtered to cheese here, and also here, right? These values also adjust. Like that, you can see that. And the same is true, of course, if I select cheese and then I hold my control key and select cookies and maybe not drinks as well, I can see that these data changes. However, if I go to page number two now, I see that still I see the same values as before, which represent the total amount of profit in the complete data set. So there is no interaction between the slicer we use here on page number one and the visual or visuals, in case there are several of them, on page number two. And the sync slicer is one option in Power BI which allow us to actually synchronize slicers across different report pages. So that means that if I select any of my categories here, then this selection will not only affect the visuals on the specific page, but also on any other kind of page which I wanted. So in our case, we only use it on page two, but it could be several pages, or all of your report pages could also be possible if you want to do that. If you want to have some kind of global slicer, right, to slice the data. So how to do this? Well, you go to View up there in the ribbon bar, and we already learned about the bookmarks pane. We can see the filter pane, which is this one. If you untick, by the way, it would not be visible. It's up to you. The selection pane, which allows us to group data, also helpful in combination with bookmarks. And there's a performance analyzer, just in case your report is slow. You can analyze it here and figuring out what the visuals are, which actually drag the performance of your report down. But there's also the last one, the so-called sync slicers. Here, synchronized slicers and control their visibility across pages in your report. So these are exactly the two options what the sync slicer can do for us. We can synchronize slicers and we can control whether we want to show them on a specific report page or not. And if you tick this option, let me tick it, you see that now there's another pane appearing, which is this one, which requires us first, in order to see something, to select any kind of slicer we have. And in this view, I only have one slicer, this one, so I can select it. If I click on anything here, I can deselect it as well. But you see that now this window changes. And this tells me now what exactly here, these two options. The first one is the eye, this one. This tells me where exactly is the slicer currently visible. So with the checkbox here, it means that currently it's only available on page number 1. So if I would tick this option for page number 2, remember on page number 2 currently, if I go here to page number 2, we only have this bar visual, nothing else. But if I go back to page number 1, select my slicer one more time, and then tick also the visibility option on page number 2, if you tick this option here, you will see that on page number 2, also the slicer appears on the exact same spot as on page number 1. It's also kind of helpful because then you don't need to rearrange it if you want to have it always in the same spot. So that works. And what you might have seen already, if I go back to the slicer here, that also this option was automatically checked, which means this is the synchronization. So this allows us to basically do any kind of, well, choosing from this slicer here on this page. Let's say I would like to see fish, desserts, and condiment, these 3. And if you now go to page number 2, you will see that also the data is, let me just go back to page number 1 and select it here. There we go. This one, and I also like to sync it. Need to sync this first. Okay, now you select those 3, and if you go to page number 2, you will see that also now these 3 have been selected, right? So the synchronization allows us now to do any kind of slicing on one page and transfer the slice data or the filtered data basically to another page or other pages. You need to make sure, as you've seen here, that you tick the specific option for the slicer on the page. So if you here it's visible and I sync it to other pages, like for instance page number 2. The benefit here is that, as I said before, you can create a global slicer but only show it on one page. That means that if you add the slicer, for instance, to this page here or to some kind of overview page, if you create something like that, and then remove the visibility on page number 2, remember currently on page number 2 it is still visible, but if I go back to page number 1, select the slicer and untick the visibility option, if I untick it here, but still leave the synchronization as checked, then this means I select anything here, the slicer or the filter gets actually transferred to page number 2. You see that this is not the complete data of profit, but a sliced version of it, the filtered data, but the slicer itself is not visible on the page. So this allows us, the string slicer panel and the options we can get when we select the slicer itself, allow us to either show the slicer also on synchronized pages or only have the slicer visible on one page, but still synchronize it to different pages. Now, if you do this, you should, of course, give the report consumer some kind of hint that this works exactly this way. Otherwise, it might lead to confusion. Just want you to be careful here. But the feature itself is really great, a great benefit and add-on to your report. Because you can really create global slicers, you can define where exactly do you want to show those slicers, and you can do this basically for all the slicers you want, across all the pages. And yes, that's it actually for the sync slicer introduction here. So if you have used them already, then good work and please continue. If not, and this was something new, then great. And I just want to encourage you to try it out yourself. Play around with it and implement it in your reports because it really helps to make your reports even better. Okay? So that's it for this video. Hopefully it was helpful. As always, thanks so much for watching and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys. Hey friends, welcome back. Now, if you followed along and have taken some of my classes, you've seen that I use the calculate function quite often. And indeed, the function is actually quite often used in Power BI because it's the most powerful function. Why? Because it allows to change the filter context, to evaluate an expression in a new or modified context. So that is true. However, in this video, I'd like to show you that it is not the only way to get actually a filtered data set or evaluate data in a different context. And what I mean by that is I show you a combination of iterators which can give you exactly the same result. So let's do that. Let's actually go first to, let's say, the orders table, and I will choose my category here to create a simple table in here. So let's go here, and let's actually style this, go to the values here, and make it text 15. So just you can see that better on your screens, okay? So we got simply a unique list of our categories we have. Now, let's actually visualize first the basic measure, let's say total sales. Okay, take this option, but of course you can use any other kind of measure as well if you want. So we see that in total, our sales add up to 1.35 million. Okay, so what if we would like to filter this data? So let's say I would like to actually get a subset of my data, but I want to make sure that I only pick up the sales where the sales amount per, in this case, transaction or row was greater than 500, and at the same time, the amount which has been sold should be less than 30. So basically evaluating items which have, which are expensive, right? Because the amount is small, but the price of sales is above 500, so pretty high. So let's do that. The first option, which comes to my mind, is immediately calculate, because I need to change the context. Because I don't want to see the complete sales for cheese. I only like to see the sales for cheese where the amount was less than 30 and the sales number was actually greater than 500 for those transactions. Okay, so then let's right click and create the measure. And by the way, if you want to pause the video now and do it yourself, feel free to do it. Otherwise, follow along. So let's click measure and let's create the measure. So the measure itself will be, let's say, subset sales with calculate is equal to, that's a long name, but I think at least it should explain what we do. So we want to evaluate the sales, as I said before, which are above 500, or the transactions with sales above 500, with an amount less than 30. So all these rows in the orders table. So, okay, then we use the calculate function because we need to change the context. The expression will, in my case, be total sales, because this is what we use currently, total sales. Here we go. And then we can give it a filter. And this filter expression is the new table which will be evaluated. And on this table, based on the filter table, the total sales will be then calculated, right? The expression will be calculated on always the filter. That is why these filter criteria in calculate always return tables. So the table itself can be either created by using the filter function, or if you have taken my calculate course, then you know that you can also use the arguments directly in here, as long as you are here in the same table. So I'm going with my orders table here, and I make sure that from the orders table, let's start for the sales, orders, TPL, and there should be a sales column. We need to go down. Where is it? There's the sales column. So the sales for the order should be greater than 500. That's what we defined. And at the same time, and that's why I use a double ampersand symbol to make sure that at the same time, the second condition which must be met is that the amount, if I search for amount, you see that I can reference here the column from the orders table directly. So both of these criteria come from the same table. That works that way. So I can say this is less than 30. These were the two criteria we defined, right? And if I close this now, the calculate function, then we are basically good to go. Now, as I said, you can also create a filter or use the filter function and then give the orders table and then set your criteria. Because under the hood, what happens is that this expression here is actually converted into the filter function on the orders table and then evaluate this expression. So it's just a shortcut if you want to write it this way. And because we are on the same table, it works. So let me evaluate that. Click on enter. Okay, there's our measure, subset sales with calculate. And now if I tick my table and also visualize the subset sales, tick this option, you will see that now we got a different number here, right? So in total, we got only 287,000 and so on. And this displays now the sales where the two criteria we have defined are actually met. So that is why calculate is so powerful, because calculate allows us to change the filter context of a measure and evaluate the measure not in the current context, but in a new context, which is this one in here, right? So because, just a little hint here, because we do or did not override the category itself, that is why you still see different values in here, because the cheese as a category is still applied as a filter. Because this filter here, the internal calculate filter, is not overriding the external one. Only the rows, the default rows which belong to cheese, which do not met this criteria, those get filtered out. And the same is true for all the other rows inside. But since these do not address directly the category, they don't override cheese completely. They simply return a subset, if you want to call it this way. So, okay, but that's with the solution with calculate. Now let's say I'd like to do it differently. I don't want to use calculate for that. Instead, I want to use an iterator function. And let's explore how that works. So right click on the measures table here, and I go to new measure. And let me call this, let's say, we said subset sales with calculate. So let's say subset sales with iterator, okay, with iterator is equal to, let me shift enter to go to new line, and now I will use an iterator. Now, the iterator I want to use is the sumX function, and this would be the replacement for calculate, because as you see here, as soon as I type the X and I use an iterator, the first argument will always be a table. So let me just use some X one more time here and open parentheses to see that. So here we need a table, and then we evaluate the expression based on the table. Now, because the iterator functions or the X functions need table as a first argument, we have the option to refer not only to the default table, like for instance orders, this one, we could only refer a subset here directly, as we have done with basically the calculate function. So I could say I'd like to use the filter function here, filter. Then I give it a table, let's say the orders table. And then as a filter expression, I use exactly the same criteria. I can refer to sales. And you see that I have in the orders table, the sales column, and can make sure that this should be greater than 500. And at the same time, using double ampersand symbol, the amount, here is it, from the orders table, should be less than 30. And I can close this, and then I can add a second argument. And the expression, of course, will be the same, will be the total sales, like that. And then I can close this, and let me actually format this maybe a little bit, go to a new line here as well, like that. Okay, and then we should be able to also move this inside. Okay, and we got it. So this would be the second way to solve it, because the iterator function iterates over a table. However, the table itself does not have to be the complete table from the data set. It could also be a subset. And in this case, we use a subset because we use the filter function here. The filter function returns a table, therefore we can use it as a first argument in the sumX function. And this table is not the complete orders table, but an orders table filtered by this criteria. So we have less rows, so a subset of the orders table, and the same subset as we had in the calculate function before. And then we evaluate the total sales on this, well, shrinked version of the original table. And if I press enter to evaluate that, okay, we got no syntax errors, so far so good. There's a second, and let's actually tick the table and tick also the second option, the way with the sumX, the iterator function. And if I tick this and make this a little bit bigger so we can see all the values, we see that we get exactly the same values here, right? And the same is true for cheese, for condiments, and so on. So all these values add up to exactly the same amount here. And there you have it. Two solutions to get exactly the same result. One time we use the calculate function, which is this one here, which is most often used actually, calculating certain kind of expressions evaluated in a new or modified context. Or using an iterator function in this case, and define first the filter table and then the normal expression on which would be evaluated on the specific filter table in this case. Okay. So these are the two options you have to get exactly the same result. And that's it actually for this video. So hopefully you understood what we did and how it worked. And I just, as always, encourage you to try it out yourself. If you have questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, thanks a lot for watching, and hopefully see you in the next video. Until then, best guys. Hey friends, welcome back to another Power BI video. Now let's say I want to rank my customers, but the requirement is that my customers should be ranked not only based on one measure, I actually have two measures. So let's say I want to rank them based on the total sales, but the total sales itself is not enough. Also, I'm interested in the profit margins. So I would like to have a customer where we have high amount of sales and of course also high amount of profit margins. And this would be my top ranked customer. So how do I do that? Well, let me click on the plus symbol here, and let's actually do that in here. So the first thing is, because I want to rank my customer, so I go to my orders table and actually visualize my customer companies first. I will use a table, but as always, you can use any kind of visualization you want. It works the same way, but I think the table is most easiest to understand. That is why I use this one. And I go with the value section here and say here under the text size, I increase it to 15. So I can see my customer companies. Let's evaluate now here also, let's say I want to see the total sales because this is one of the measures I'm interested in. So I can sort this directly in here and I would see that quick stop here would be my top customer if I would only refer to the total amount of sales. However, as I said, I'm also interested in the margins. So I have my total profit here. So let's say I create the margin itself by dividing total profit by total sales. So I could then here right click on the measures table and say I'd like to create a new measure. So no measure up there, no measure. And then I do that here and say this will be my profit margin. Margin is equal to, and I go to new line. And because I do a division, I will use the divide function because it's best practice. A safe divide to ensure I don't get any division by zero errors. And I'm using here my total profit, and divide this by the total sales. Like that, okay? And an alternate result, I simply type in a 0. Close this, and I'm good to go. So this will be my profit margin. And I like to make sure, if I take this option, that this is actually a percentage figure. Take this option here, and we get percentage. So now if I go back to my report and I take the option, you would see that here, these are the profit margins. And you can see that the margin itself here for this customer would be 33%. So I can already see that there are customers with higher margins, like for instance this one here with 45%. And what is the highest margin? Let's actually figure that out. If I sort by profit margin, I can see that this one here has a profit margin above 50%, so pretty high, right? On the other hand, the total sales are quite low. So that is why I want to combine those two measures somehow. And one idea would be to create two separate rankings and combine those rankings. So I could say, let's rank this, go right click to the measures table, new measure. And let's say the first measure is the sales ranking, call it sales ranking is equal to. And then I say I want to use the rank X function. So rank X iterator. And we know that for the iterator, the first argument will always be a table or a filtered table. In this case, because we already have the customer companies here in the visual itself, and we want to make sure that we do not use this context, the filter context here, but include in the ranking all the customers, so our complete table, we will use the all function. So also I said this before, but the rank X function and the all function is always a good combination. So those are very often used together to ensure that you have no here external filters which affect the ranking and therefore do not take into account all the different kinds of customers in our case. So all function allows us to remove those filters and ensure we will use all the companies. So company, here we go, all of them. And then the expression we want to rank on, in the first case, because it's a sales ranking, we use total sales. And then the order, the value we'll skip. The order itself is important. We'll say we want to rank this descending because the highest amount of sales should be number 1 in the ranking. Then we can close this and we are basically good to go. So if I press enter and we have created the sales ranking, we could also go to the table one more time and tick the option just to have it visually to us. And we see that here, this one is pretty low. So if I first untick everything, select this one more time, and sort here by the sales ranking, we will see that sorted here, that the highest amount of sales, we just quick stop here, has sales ranking number 1, and so on, right? So the sorting here, like total sales, is the same as sorting as sales ranking, because we rank on the total sales. Now we do some kind of similar thing now for the profit margin, which means that I could actually go to my sales ranking and completely copy this code. You can also rewrite it if you want, but it's exactly the same code. We just need to change the measure and the name. So I Control-C to copy it. I go to the measures table and say I'd like to create a new measure. Okay, here we go. And we paste it inside and just need to change here, call this profit ratio ranking and referring here to the profit margin. We call it margin, sorry for that. Let's call it profit margin, not ratio. Margin ranking. And that's it. So the formula is exactly the same. We rank based on all the customer companies, because this is what we currently also have in the view. We make sure with the all function that we remove any kind of filters which might have been applied. In this case, each row in the table, or if you have a bar chart, each bar in the bar chart would be a filter, and you want to avoid that we only filter on a specific company, otherwise the ranking would always be 1. That is why we use all to remove this, and then we simply use the expression itself and ensure that we rank here descending, so the highest profit margin should be on top. And the last argument, just to tell this one more time here, this is dense or skip. It depends on how you want to deal with if someone has exactly the same profit margin or exactly the same sales. Then you can either use a dense, which means that if you have 2 on the 3rd place, then the next one would be 4, or you use skip, that means you have 2 on the 3rd place and the next value would be 5th in the ranking. So that's the only difference here. It's not that important, but if you're interested in what the difference is, now you know it. So let's actually evaluate that here as well. Press enter and we are good to go. There's our second ranking. And now let's tick this here as well. Go to the profit margin ranking, tick the option here, and we get the rankings in here, right? And if I would sort this here, go here in sorting, and one more time, we would see that here the highest profit margin here would be on top, which is the same frankly here as sorting by profit margin, right? The ranking is 1, and we can see the profit margin here. Now we have created our 2 ranks, and we can simply do the following. We can simply add those 2. This would be one idea, to say that if I right-click on the measures table and create a measure here and say for this measure, this is simply the sum of those 2. So this will be my final ranking. Final ranking is equal to, or let's call it actually total ranking until the last one, final ranking. Total ranking is equal to, and now we use the 2 ranks we have. So rank, and there is it, profit margin ranking, and we simply add simple addition here to the other ranking we have, which is the sales ranking. Where is it? Here we go. Simply sum of those 2 measures. We can evaluate that. And just to make sure that we get it correctly, let's also visualize that. So it's not necessary to do that. I just want to make it step by step. I think it's easier to understand. So total, and where is it? Total ranking. Here we go. Tick the option, and you see that here 83 plus 1 is 84, 86 plus 2 is 88, and so on, right? So we can see the final values in here. So then, after creating our total ranking, we can use this ranking now to rank. So basically we create a ranking based on our rankings. Because what I say here is the lowest amount here, so who has the lowest or the highest in this case sales rankings optimal would be here's a 1 and here's a 1 and we got 2, so then the 2 should be number 1, right? So you could of course now use this ranking directly and sort it and see that then what is best, which is Richter Supermarkt, right, would be number 1. But if you don't like to show 31, 35 and so on, because these numbers might be quite confusing, then you can create an additional ranking based on the total ranking. And that's what we do here. To finish this task, we right click on the measures table, we go to new measure, and then create our final ranking. That's why I saved this name here for the last step. So final ranking is equal to, and the formula is familiar because the formula now is again rank x function, so an iterator function over a table. We want to make sure we use all the companies. Here we go. Close this here, and then the expression will, in this case, be the total ranking, so the last ranking we've created. And then we make sure that the value we can skip, but the orders should be ascending, right? So ascending, because here we would like to have the lowest. Because if someone is highest ranked in sales and also highest ranked in profit, then of course, then the optimal would be 1 plus 1, right? And that is why we use the lowest ascending here, considering the order. The ties I will skip again, and then I will press enter to evaluate my ranking. And I got my final ranking in here. And if I have this final ranking and also tickets to add it to the table, just to see that, now, of course, need to select the table first, and click on the final ranking. And then you see that we got to start with 1, 2, 3, and so on. So because we sorted by the total ranking here already, that means that the final ranking is now already in the correct order, and you see exactly what happens. And there, this is an example what I meant. You got here 62 and here 62, and you got the 10 twice, right? And the next value would then be 12. Now, or here you got 17, 17, 17, the next value would be 20. If you do not want to have this behavior, we can modify that. So you can say as the last argument, instead of skip, you use dense, because currently it's skipped. And watch what happens if I use dense here with the 9, 10, 10, and then 12. I evaluate that, and now I have 9, 10, 10, and then 11. Okay, so that's the difference between dense and skipped, visually also. I've seen. And that's it, yeah. So a few steps involved into this action, I know, but this would be just one way how you might want to solve this. So you have maybe several measures which are important, which are crucial, and you want to take all of them into account, and based on them you want to create your final ranking. And it could also be the case that you have certain kinds of weights. Let's say total sales is currently more important than the profit margin because you want to grow, and this is the most important fact currently in your company. Then you might want to add a specific weight to the total sales ranking, which is higher than the weight on the profit margin. But you just need to multiply it by different kinds of weights. Could also be a use case for you, but I leave that up to you. I just think that the way how we did this is clear now. If you have questions, of course, feel free to ask. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys. Hey friends, welcome back to the next video. Now here we'd like to dive one more time into the ranking in Power BI. However, we will first do our ranking more dynamic, so based on a selection from the report consumer. And second, I'm going to show you a solution for the total error, which often appears when you have some kind of dynamic ranking. So let's do that. Let's first actually create a new page here. And because we already did the ranking on the last video here, in the ranking combination of two ranks, we could actually reuse that. We could use the sales ranking again and refer to our customer company to save some time. So let's do that. Let's go in here and say I'd like to display the customer companies. So I go to my orders table, and there I have the customer company, this option here. And I like to increase the text size here a little bit, go to the value section, and then say the text size here is 15. Okay, so far so good. And then we can also use the ranking. So the default ranking we had, which was the total sales ranking. So I need to go to, where is it? Total sales ranking. Let's just search for rank here and find there's the sales ranking, right? We can take the option to edit this to our visualization, and let's maybe sort it so we can see here the sale based top sales. This company is here quick stop. Okay, so far so good. Now we can already see that we got one total issue here with normal ranking because the total itself is 1, right? And this actually is exactly what I meant when I'm referring to the total issue. But we will see this if we actually create a filter here. So instead of showing all the rankings up to our last one, so all the customers, we only like to see, let's say, the top 10, for instance, or top 5. This should be dynamic. And we know that if we want to do something dynamic, we can refer to parameters. So you can go to Modeling tab here, go there, and click on New Parameter for this what if scenario. Take the option, and then you specify here what's the parameter, the name. So let's say I call this dynamic ranking. Okay, it should be a whole number, that's fine. The minimum actually should be 1 because I want to see at least one value. Of course, you can also set it to 5, what the minimum is from customer companies you want to see, but let's say 1. And the maximum should be, well, I know I have 89 customers, so I simply say 89 here if I want to see all of them. And the increment is 1, that's fine. And I also want to add a slicer to the page, and I don't need to set a default value, that's also fine. I click OK, and then I just wait until this table gets created. And now I have my dynamic ranking here, which I can use, right? So if I add this somewhere, this slider here, I can slide here around, or I can simply add here, let's say 10, press enter, and now I would like to see actually the top 10 customers in here. Of course, this does not work because currently this slider here is not connected to the ranking here or to any of our companies. And we can easily check this because whenever we create a parameter up there, then what basically happens is that the generate series function in DAX is called and a new table is created. So if I make this smaller here and also close the orders table, we'll see that there is the dynamic ranking table, this one here, which is created by, as I said, a DAX function, which is called generate series. We have a start value, an end value, and here also the step size. You can modify this at any time if you want, but what basically happens is if I go to the view here, that another table is created in the model, which is, where is it? Dynamic ranking, this one here. Simply with one column with all the numbers. Okay, so now we have our slider here, and we need to now link it to show only the sales. So I don't want to see the ranking, actually I want to see the sales for the customers based on the ranking we have selected here. So I can right click on the measures table, go to new measure, and then I check here to make sure that I only display the total sales for the ranking we have selected. So let's say here, top X customers is equal to, let me go to line here, let's specify here that dynamic ranking, and let's also check with if condition whether there actually is a ranking here, and whether the ranking actually is smaller than the selected one. So if the ranking, so sales ranking here, if this ranking is less or equal to from our dynamic ranking table, the value, so this is the value which can be changed by the slider from the parameter. If this is less or equal to this value, then we would like to see the total sales, and otherwise we don't want to display anything, and that is why we return to blank here. Blank simply means don't return anything, and that's it. So make sure that we only show the sales, or for the customer for sales ranking less than the value we've selected here, or the report consumer selects. So if I press enter to evaluate this measure, I can see that the top X here works. Now if I add it to the visualization, it's called here top X, I would see here I only see the sales for the, in this case, top 10, right? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So that's fine, but I still see all the blanks here. Why is that? I don't want to see this. Well, the reason for this is because you still have sales ranking in here, the default one in the view. And because there are values for those companies, that's why you see the blanks in here, right? So if you want to get rid of those and only see the top X customers, simply remove the sales ranking here, this one. So if I untick the box here, click on the cross symbol, remove it, and then you see you only have now the top 10, in this case, customers. And if I change this, let's say top 5, press enter, I would only see the top 5. So this works dynamically, right? So the slicer and so on, that works. That's fine. However, you probably have already spotted the issue. If I make this smaller, I have here 1.35 million. Now, I know for a fact that this is the total amount of sales across the whole time frame in the complete data set. That is why it's impossible that actually those 10 customers create the total amount. And this is exactly what I meant at the beginning when I said the issue with the totals. Because if you create something dynamic like this, where you have a slicer, or slider in this case, which allows you to change something here, the totals are most often messed up and don't show the correct number. So what can we do? Well, one way would be to simply remove them, because we can easily check whether we have a customer company in the view. We can use various functions for that. Has one value would be one function, or is filtered would be one function, or also is in scope would be one function. All these functions allow us to check whether a company, in this case, is available, and if not, which for the total is not the case, because there is no one company in total, then we can do something else or return something else. So as an example, if I go back to my total top X customers function here, I could wrap this in another if condition. So I could go in here and say, I'd like to here add an if, say if, and as I said, you have 3 options. You can use has one value, you can use is filtered, or you can use is in scope. All these functions, so has one value would be available in here, and you can also read through them if you want. In my case, I want to use the is filtered now, just to show you the function. Here returns true when there are direct filters on a specific column. So you can tick this option, and if you now go for the column you have in your visualization, so in my case it's here the customer company name, so I can go with the company, here we go, this one, and close this, and this will definitely return true for all rows in this table, or if you have a bar chart for each bar where you have a customer name in front. And for the totals, this is of course not the case. There is no one specific company filtered in the total. The total represents all customer companies. And that is why this would refer to false, this whole expression. And the same is true for has one value or is in scope. This will also return false for the total row. And because that's the case, we can easily then say, if this is true, then please do exactly the shrinking we have here. And if not, type a comma here and go to a line. If not, I could say I don't want to show anything, blank. And if I close this, and if I press enter to evaluate this, you will see that now the 135 million disappears, and I don't have any total in here. Now, if this helps you and fixes your problem, then you're good to go, and you can now skip the video if you want. But if you actually want to show something here in the total, and you want to actually show the right number, or you're just interested in how to show this, even if you don't use it, then stick to this video, please, and follow me. So let's actually modify our top X customers a little bit more, because for the second argument here, instead of showing blank, so showing nothing, we want to actually show something else. We want to show the total sales, but only for the selected amount of companies we have here. And we can do this using the calculate function. So I can go here with calculate, and we want to calculate the total sales, because that's actually the measure we have, right? Because we display with the up here the total sales. Of course, then at the bottom, so let me just remove this here. At the bottom here, of course, we also want to show the total sales. So these measures here, this one and this one, they of course should be identical. Now, the calculate function, as we all know, allow us to change the filter context. So we can actually modify here, instead of using this all, we can give it here a different table. And this different table will then be used to evaluate the total sales. And that's what we do here. We say, as a second argument here, we're using the top n function. So top n also returns a table, here a given number of top rows according to a specified expression. Now we can specify here the value, You can hard code this if you want, but for us, of course, it would be the dynamic ranking value, right? Because if you have 10 customers selected, you would see that you would like to see the total sales for those 10 customers. If you have 5 selected, you would like to see it for 5, and so on. So that's the logic. So that is why we are referring to the top n by the dynamic here, dynamic ranking by the value, this one here, okay? And then we specify as a second argument here, second argument in the top n function, the actual table we want to use. Now the table is, we can use here also DAX expression for that, and I will use the values function, so values. And for the values, we simply need to refer to here either a table or a column. In our case, a column is sufficient because we actually only have the customer company names here. So you can say values, and then company, here we go, this one here. And then I can close this here like that. And we have also set the table for the top n. And then finally, of course, we need to give it the expression. Now we use total sales. And because we did our ranking originally descending, so which means that the top sales rank, number 1, of course, is the one with the highest amount of sales, we also decide to use descending here to make sure that we only return these. Then you can close the top, you can close the second one, the if one, the calculate, sorry, and then last one, the if, the first if condition like that. And maybe you'd also like to go in here. Let's just see, just to format this a little bit. Let's go here, new line, like that, and let's just see what do we fit this here. Okay, let's just. Okay, I think considering the formatting might be a little more difficult. Let's do it this way, okay? As I said, this is up to you, and you can also use an online tool to format this correctly later on if you want. But the main point really is to understand how this formula works. So we did it step by step. We first actually evaluate the ranking. We did it dynamically because we're referring to, in this case, a parameter which we've created. We made sure that we only show it if a company is filtered. And then finally, if no company is filtered, the second argument, this one here, of course, can only be evaluated for the total, because the total is the only row where no company is filtered directly. It refers to all the companies by default. And we say we'd like to actually return the total sales here as well for the total row, but we want to make sure that the total sales is only calculated in a modified table context, so in this one, and this context is referring to the top n, in this case also referenced by the dynamic ranking value, so top 10 for instance, of the customer companies, and the top is selected by the total sales descending. And if we do it this way, let's actually evaluate this now. Let's press enter here and see what happens to the total. And you see that now we got a value which is much smaller than the 1.53 million, which is the default value, and it's only referring to all the values we have here in the selection. So if I make this maybe even smaller so we can see that, let's say here only the top 3, press enter, you will see that also this value adjusts. And if you sum those values up, I mean more or less 100, 200, 300, 320, 332, 333, and so on. And if you add these up, then of course you should get this result here, okay? And that's how you can fix this total issue, which by default gets created whenever you're dealing with dynamic rankings or dynamic, anything dynamic, okay, which you display. So that's it for this video. Hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully you can use this in your reports to fix these issues. And thanks a lot for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the next video. Now let's dive one more time into Pareto charts, but this time we're going to do it step by step, and I'm gonna visualize it at the end. So let's dive into that. At first I click on the plus symbol to create a new report page. And I will create the Pareto based on my categories. So this is my example here, but you can also apply what we learn here, of course, to all other kind of use cases. Now, let's actually visualize in a table our category. As I said, we do it step by step. So we go in the orders table and say, I'd like to use my category. The table is fine. Let me just increase the size a little bit. Go to the values and say, for this time, let's actually display this as 15. so that you hopefully can see this on your screens. Okay, so here we got the category. Now the next is I'd like to display the total sales in here, and we can see we got the different total sales amounts for the categories. And what we need, of course, is a sort here, right? Because the Pareto will actually start with the highest, which is drinks. Then we'll add cheese to it. The next we add desserts to it, and so on. We would like to see whether the 80-20 rule actually applies or not. So let's just see. The total sales is one thing. What we also want is a ranking. So the ranking will be helpful in calculating the running total as a next step. So let's first create the ranking. If you want to pause the video to do it yourself, then do it and try it out. Otherwise, follow me along. So let's actually right click on our measures table and say I'd like to create a new measure. Now this measure here will be that will be the category ranking. So category ranking is equal to, I go to a new line, press Shift Enter and a tab just to go a little bit inside. And then I'm using here for this ranking rank X function. So rank X, there we go, an iterator, and we know using a table here, we want to make sure that we include all the categories. So we remove any external filters. So I'm referring to the all keyword here. And then I need to give it either a complete table name here or the column. In our case, the column is sufficient. So we are referring to the categories. Categories, here we go. And then the expression will be the total sales. Total sales. And we want to make sure, we can skip the value, but we want to make sure that the order is descending. And I can also skip the ties, because here I can see immediately there are no two categories with exactly the same amount. And also I don't care whether I skip it or whether it stands in this case. So let's actually press enter to evaluate that formula. And let's see what we get. We got our category ranking. We can add this to the visual. Let's tick the option. And let's just see what we get. Okay, here we go. And we see that we start here with drinks, which is rank number 1 because it's the highest amount. Then we have cheese, the second, dessert, the third, and so on until to the end, which is cookies, which is 8. You know, if you want to get rid of the one, you know from the last video how to deal with that. But in this case, it doesn't matter. It is just for visually understanding how we create the Pareto step by step. Okay, so now we have the total sales, we have the category ranking. The next step would be to create a running total. Because remember, in a Pareto chart, we actually start with the highest value, and then in the second row, or in the second part of the visual, we would have the sum of the first 2. Then we have the sum of the first 3, and so on. So basically, we need to create a running total on our total sales. And then this is where this category ranking will come into place. Because we can use the category ranking to make sure we only include the specific ranks we define. So here, for instance, only the first one, then the first 2, then the first 3, and so on. That is why we create the ranking column. It's a kind of helper column. But you'll see that in a minute. If I right-click here on the measures table and say I'd like to create a new measure, click this option. Then I can here define my category running totals. So, of course, you can name this whatever you like, but let me just category running total is equal to, here I say sum x. I'm using iterator function. And this iterator function, as we know from one of the videos, needs a table. But this table is not bound to a table we already have. We can also create our own filter table version, right? And that's what we do here. We will use, again, the top n function, which we learned in the last video. So top n allow us to return a given number of top rows according to a specified expression. So we can say we would like to have the top n, and we're referring to the category ranking, what we defined, this one, and want to make sure here that we include all the categories. So that's why remove any filters using the all function. Categories, category, here we go, this one. And of course the expression itself is referring to the total sales, because this is the measure we can evaluate. So total sales at the bottom here, this one. And then we say we want to rank this descending. Descending, I can close this. And then finally, of course, the iterator itself here. So what do you want to return? Well, I want to return the total sales. Total sales. So, and we should be good to go, right? So let me maybe go in here and actually visualize it like that maybe, okay? That's our formula here. Even though we could also go actually into a new line here and evaluate this way and then go back. Press Shift Backspace to go back, like that maybe. But as I said, that's only up to you how you want to form that. But for me, that's fine. And should basically get us exactly what we want, a running total based on the ranking. And want to make sure here that we include all categories to remove the filter from the visual, in our case the table, and return then the total sales. So if we now evaluate this measure, press Enter to evaluate it, and see what we get if I tick the table and go to the category, running totals, I tick the option, you see that we start with the 288, so we have exactly the same values here, but then in the second row, we have 539, which is simply the sum of those two. Then we got 719, which is the sum of those three, and so on, up to the total value of 1.35 million in the last one, if we add all of them together. That's what we would expect, right? So this number should be equal to this number here. The first one here, the total, only returns the first drinks here, but again, this is not really important here, because we use those measures. We simply build them step by step, but we'll use them in a chart later on. But it's important to understand how that works and why we calculate at first the category ranking to ensure that the running total is evaluating all the categories, so the sales for all of them, but then only filter them down to the specific ranking we currently have in the view. Like here, the first two, the first three, and so on. And that's why we get those values in here. Then the next step would be that we calculate a measure which includes all sales. So basically we would like to have this 1.353 million and so on everywhere. So that's actually kind of simple, because all we need to do is we right click on the measures table, new measure, and evaluate here this with the calculate function, which allows us to change this context and say this will be, let's say, all, or let's say, stick to it, category, spell it correctly, all sales, okay, is equal to, and I want to calculate, and then the expression will be the total sales, where is it, total sales, here we go, and then the filter will be all, and then I can refer to either a column or a table. In this case, I refer to the column, which is the categories, right, this one here. I can close this, and then I can also close the calculate function like that. So this would mean that the table itself, on which we want to evaluate the total sales using the calculate function, is removing all external filters from here, and instead is referring to the whole category table. And if we do this and press enter, then we get our category all sales. And of course, I can also tick this here, tick this option here, and you'll see that we got this 1.35 million everywhere. So that's what we need. And the two last measures we need is at first the 80%, and then also the percentage figure based on the running totals, referring to the all sales we have. So let's do that. First, right click here and say new measure and create the 80%. So the 80% will be useful because we would like to add the 80% line in the visualization. So that's why I simply call this, let's say, 80% line. 80% line is equal to, and I simply say 80 divided by 100. Okay, nothing special, simply 0.8 or 80%. Now let's press enter to evaluate that. Okay, here we go. And then finally what we need is we need to have a division of the running total we have created, this one, by the all sales. So to see what kind of percentage number we're currently in for our line chart. So let's do that. Let's right click on the measures table, create new measure, tick this option. And let's say here, this will be simply the running sales, what we have. So the running, I'll call this actually percentage, let's say category, to be consistent here, percentage is equal to, let's say, running, category running totals divided by all, category all totals. There it is. Simply a division. And actually, to be here concise and also do it best practice like, we simply say, using a comma here, and wrap this in the divide function. Divide. So like that, okay? As I said, Sometimes I have to admit that I forget it myself, but it's best practice to use it. So we have this, and then let me press enter to evaluate that. Okay, so that should be a percentage number. So I tick this option here and also tick this as a percentage symbol. And I do the same for my 80% line. I tick this and also add a percentage symbol here. Okay, and now let's actually visualize that. And maybe one more thing, let's actually remove the decimal numbers. I don't think we need them, at least not for the 80%. And also not for the category percent, also remove it here. Those two, okay. One more time. Okay, here we go. So now let's actually visualize that. Tick on the 80% line. We should see 80% everywhere, and this is exactly what we get. So far, so good. And then the second is the category percentage. Let me tick this option here as well. And let's see what we get. Okay, we start here with 21%. So that simply means 288,000 and so on, divided by 1.3 million. Then we have 539, divided by 1.35 million, and so on is 40%, and so on up to 100%, right? Because this value is 1.35 divided by 1.35 and so on is exactly 1, so 100%. That's fine. And again, here it starts with the first value, as we have seen here for this category running totals as well, as well as for the category ranking, but you know how to deal with that. If you don't want to display it, you can easily do that. You can easily fix that. So now the final task is actually adding all this together into one visualization, right? So let's actually use one which allows us to create bars and lines. So I will take this option here, line and stack column, and of course, sorry for that. First, make sure untick the table. I want to keep the table. So just for your reference later on, if you open the file from the resource section. But let me just now click on the visual one more time to create the template. Here we go. Add it on the bottom here. And then I'd like to actually visualize the categories. Take this option as a bars. And I also like to see the sales for them. So I can take the total sales, go to my measures. So there it is, total sales, here we go. And then I can see my categories here and the total sales numbers. And if I want to add the labels, you can go to the formatting options and also add the data labels. And maybe display them inside or not. I mean, that's up to you. Let's leave it for now, maybe like that. We see how we end up if we also add the lines. So just a second for that. But make sure, you can see by default it's sorted this way. But if you click on the three dots, you can also see that the sort descending here is important. Okay. So if this is for whatever reason not the default one for you, you would go to the three dots and make sure it's sorted descending. So we start with the highest value, the drinks, as we have seen, and up here as well. Okay. So then we need to add two lines here. So the first one would be the 80% line. If I go back here and I go to my, where is it, the 80% line here, I can drag this to the line value area, right? So I can go in here and drag it to my lines. Drag and drop it, and then I have my 80% line here. Also the label, you can tick this off if you don't want to show it, but it's up to you. So if I go to the formatting options, I need to check, select the visual itself. Yes, that's fine. And go to the data labels here. And if I scroll down, here, customize series, yes. And then for the totals, that's fine. But for the 80% line, take this as off, and then you'll get rid of those, right? So that's how you can fix this if you don't want to display it. So far, so good. And then finally, of course, now the moment we all waited for is adding the category percentage, right, to our running total or Pareto here, Pareto chart. And this is pretty easy because we have calculated everything already. We just need to add the category percentage here, so this one, also to the visual down there. So let's actually go to category percentage, here it is. And of course go back to the view here and say category percentage and drag this also into the line area. So drag and drop it and place it in here. And you see that now we also got the line in here, which starts with 21, 40, 53, and so on. And you see I still have the labels here. I mean, you could remove them if you want. You also have the axis here on the side, but that's up to you, right? So I leave them for now, like that. And here I think it makes sense then to go back maybe to the formatting options here, to the data labels, and here position. I'd like to actually add them, let's say inside, let's say outside end. Click this option simply to add this also on top of this bar. And probably I would need a little bit more space, because it's a little bit pressed here on the bar, but doesn't matter for now. So the idea is clear, hopefully, and as you can see here, we have created together the Pareto chart. We can see here the Pareto line, and then we can easily check, okay, is the 80% here, so actually this threshold here, does it fit actually the Pareto rule, which would refer to the fact that actually only 20% of our categories in this case should be responsible for 80% of our sales. And this is clearly here not the case, because as you can see here, the 80% actually we achieve here after the fish category. So obviously all these categories, which would be 5 from a total of 8, is of course does not fit the 20%, right? Which should be account to 80% of the sales. But as I said, this is just one example here, and you can use this of course in your own data set as well and try that out and visualize of course the end result. So we went through this step by step. We started with just visualizing here the table, the total sales. Then we also did a ranking. We need the ranking as a helper column. To remind you here one more time, to create the running totals, because we use the top n function based on the ranking to ensure that we create exactly those numbers here, which add up to the total amount, because this column is very important, because this column is actually the line we plotted here, the blue one, right? And the all here is then referring to all the sales, and 80% here, as well as the category percentage. So sorry for that. This is the line we plot, but this category percentage, of course, is based on the running total here, divided by this value. And as soon as we have all the measures, then we can easily go inside our visualization and create, as I said here, this bar and line chart together, and have all the bars here, which is in this case our categories. We want to make sure that we sort them descendant. So make sure that the highest value is here, which is strings. And then we see here the running total and can easily check the cross symbol here and whether the 80-20 rule applies to our data set or not. So that's it for this video. Hopefully that was helpful, and hopefully you were able to follow along. I just encourage you, try it out yourself, or feel free to play around with the data from the resource section. There you have this report. And otherwise, thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys. Hey friends, welcome back to the next video. And here I'd like to share with you a neat little trick which is available in Power BI, which is the cluster analysis. So let me actually click on a plus symbol here and show you what I mean. So the cluster analysis is based on the scatter plot. So you first need to create a scatter chart in your report. So I can create this here. I can drag this down. And then whenever you deal with scatter plots, you know that you need to add something to the x-axis as well as the y-axis, so numerical values. So let's say I'm using two measures here. In my case, I will use the total sales, and I drag this into the y-axis as an example, like that. And then I also need to have another numerical field. In this case, I will go with the amount, which is not a measure we have created, but it is a field directly coming from the table here. So we can also use fields which by default are numeric, and therefore they are summed up directly in the visual itself. And drag this to the x-axis. So you can do this here as well, right? So you can either use fields like these, or discount as an example, so all numerical fields, or you could use measures if you have them, as long as they are numeric. And then we need to add something into the detail or the legend. Now, because I would like to use the cluster for the coloring, I will actually drag something into detail to split the dot. Because what happens by default, of course, is Power BI is summing up the amount and also the total sales. And that is why we only see one dot in here, right? So let's split this up by any of our columns we have. So as an example, I'm going to go with a customer company or customer country. This is up to me what I want to do. I will go with the company, so I have a little bit more data points. And you see that that's what we get, right? So one dot for each of the companies we have, depending on their total sales, of course, on the y-axis, and the amount on the x-axis. But this is just an example. You can use any kind of numerical field you want. Now let's say I'd like to actually cluster them. So I would say, for instance, I think that these could be outliers, but could also be our top customers. So I can add them to a specific cluster. And Power BI allows us to do this without any kind of additional calculation. All we do is we click on the three dots in the scatter plot visual, and there's an option to automatically find clusters. So if you tick this option, you will see that now a window appears, and this window allows you to name them. Let's say customer company clusters, it's the default name. Of course, you can rename it. I just leave it default for now. You see the field it's based on. Currently, we have the customer company in the scatter plot. That is why this is a field it's based on. And now you can add here an additional description if you want. And here you specify the number of clusters, or you leave it to auto, and then Power BI automatically uses an algorithm to find out the number of clusters. So if I type in a 4 here as an example, I start with a cluster of 4 here, and I click OK, then this gets applied, and watch what happens. If I take this option, Power BI is calculating it and figuring out which points belong to which cluster, and now it's there, and you see that the cluster automatically has here put into the legend area. That is why I dragged the customer detail first in the customer company first into detail. Now I have the clusters here. I have the name of the cluster. That is why you might want to choose a different name if you apply this to your chart. And you see here the different kinds of clusters you have. So 1 to 4. And you see that these belong to one cluster. Then you got those belong to one cluster. Here you got a cluster. Here you got a cluster. So this is how you can cluster the data. This is sometimes often used in specific cases, and it's built into Power BI, which is quite neat functionality, at least from my point of view. Now, if you say the cluster here is actually not correct, I need to modify it. You have two options. You can either click when you select the visual and go to the legend here directly, click on a little down arrow here, and say I'd like to actually edit the clusters down there. You can tick this option and say here I'd like to change here the number of clusters. You can also change the name here if you want. And here you can see the amount of items per cluster. Now if you say here I'd like to have 3 clusters and tick the option, you will see that now it gets calculated anew, and now you only have 3 clusters, right? Cluster 1, 2, and 3. So this is how you can modify it, simply by going to the customer company cluster here, click on the down arrow and say edit the clusters. The second option is if you actually scroll down and you see that here for the orders table, next to customer company, you also have this cluster here, which is basically a group which gets created. And you also can go here on the 3 dots under more options, and there's also an option to edit clusters. And if you tick it here, you can see exactly the same behavior here, and you can change here the number of clusters. Go away here, you can leave it to auto if you want, and if I click OK, let's just see what we get. If we set the auto instead of setting this manually, we get 4 again, which in this case is the default one we have set at the beginning as well. And that's how you can use cluster analysis in Power BI. Quite easy, and also modify the clusters if you think that the number of clusters is wrong. Okay, so that's it for this video. Thanks a lot for watching. As always, I hope you can use this in your reports, and I wish you all the best. Hopefully see you in the next video. Until then, best guys.